Jazz elect to move on from Laurie. What could that look like as far as the haul? So we'll get to the latest with Utah Jazz. We do have NBA draft coverage coming up for you guys 1 week from today, next Wednesday, June the 25th, first-round coverage after we say goodnight. And then the next day will be second-round coverage during kind of the same time frame. NBA draft is a little bit different this year. Latest in the offseason with the NFL and college football. This time of year, there's really not a whole lot going on. Of course, the world of college football continues to stay focused on the college football playoff format, the settlement between the House settlement and NCAA, what that means for the landscape of college football. Little recruiting news here or there, but kind of not a lot going on. As we talked about on Monday, Alex Jensen has finalized his roster for the Utah men's basketball team. And the accolades continue to spill in preseason style for BYU. A.J. DeBance has been with the U19s and has been the best player. And instantly will become the most intriguing, exciting prospect that I think that we've really ever seen here, at least as far as the pedigree goes. Of course, we've had plenty of great college basketball players here in state. But A.J., right away, the most coveted prospect that has ever signed on the dotted line and plays college basketball at BYU. The latest on Major League Baseball to Salt Lake City. A new city has entered the running as far as competition. It's Austin, Texas. And a lot of momentum now in Austin. That's a growing city for a number of different reasons. Portland, of course, has their hat in the mix as well. Salt Lake Tribune with a good piece today that we'll kind of break down for you guys and bring to you as far as the future of what Major League Baseball could look like here in Utah. So busy show today. Weekend off for RSL. Real Salt Lake will be back in action on June the 28th, taking on Sporting Kansas City. Sporting Kansas City, the home of one Johnny Russell. Once upon a time, Johnny opened up his bank account for RSL last week. In addition to Willie Agata, a couple of players acquired prior to the close of the primary transfer window by Kurt Schmidt and his staff. The secondary summer transfer window opens mid-July-ish. And a lot of momentum in the direction of potential additions for Kurt and his staff to shore up RSL's roster prior to the close of the season. So a lot to get to on the show today. Great to have you guys with us. We'll open things up with Tony Jones, our buddy from The Athletic, who covers the NBA, covers the Utah Jazz, and does a lot of NBA draft stuff too. So we'll get the latest with Tony as far as the NBA draft and the Utah Jazz, what his sources are saying about the potential of the Jazz adding to this roster, or will they continue the slow rebuild that is now being run by Austin Ainge? So Tony stops by today. Neil Smith, former general manager of the New York Rangers and the New York Islanders, high-level scout for the Detroit Red Wings. Of course, he is our weekly NHL guest, and we'll bring him on today to talk Stanley Cup, to talk Florida Panthers. Sam Bennett, Sean and I were talking about this during Crosstalk. Sam Bennett is an unrestricted free agent. Obviously, Conn Smythe changes things. Winning 2 Stanley Cups changes things. Has he played himself out of the price range for Bill Armstrong and the Utah Hockey Club? We'll get to that with Neil today. More NBA with Timmy, Good Time Bontemps from ESPN. Covers the NBA for the Worldwide Leader. Also joins Brian Windhorst on his podcast on a very consistent basis. Then the latest from the University of Utah side of things with our buddy Josh Furlong, who covers the Utes for KSL. Tony Jones, Neil Smith, Tim Bontemps, Josh Furlong, me, Spence Checketts, all of you, the great listeners, and that guy, Porter Larson, on a Wednesday afternoon. Happy Wednesday, pal. How was yesterday?
It was fun. Always good catching up with my guy, Tony Parks, here in studio. So had some fun with him. Oh, when you're doing radio during the summer, sometimes it can be slow, but we've got NBA Finals. We've got the Stanley Cup. We had plenty to get to with one Tony Parks. So, good time, but welcome back to the studio.
Yes, indeed. Good to be back with a lot to do on this Wednesday edition of the program. So let's dig into it. Our first guest right out of the gates will be our buddy Tony Jones from The Athletic. But before TJ stops by on this hot, sunny Wednesday, June afternoon, courtesy of our good friends at Prize Picks, it is time now for your opening tip.
Welcome to The Drive with Spence Checketts on Utah's #1 sports talk. Now into the studios of ESPN 700 to set the scene for the show. The opening tip of The Drive is brought to you by Prize Picks. Use the code ESPN700 and run your game with Prize Picks.
Prize Picks, the best place to turn your sports knowledge into cash with millions of members. Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash. You can run your game all season long on Prize Picks. There's only one series left in the playoffs. There might be only one game left in the playoffs. Championship is officially on the line. That means time is running out for you to put your final takes to the test on Prize Picks, the best place to cash in on your favorite sport. So here's what you do. You download the Prize Picks app today. Use the promo code ESPN700. You get $50 when you play that first $5 lineup. Do not have to win the $5 lineup. It is on the house. So download the Prize Picks app today. Use the promo code ESPN700 on checkout. They're going to hook you up with $50 when you play that first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, you can run your game all season long. All right, so no NBA action tonight, but Game 6 of the NBA Finals will be tomorrow as the series returns to Gainesbridge Fieldhouse in Indianapolis, Indiana, where the Oklahoma City Thunder will try to close out the Indiana Pacers to win the NBA championship. Of course, Oklahoma City once upon a time was in the finals with Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Russell Westbrook. And so I was thinking about this morning through the prism of the building process the Utah Jazz find themselves in. And, you know, there's a lot of noise going on right now about the Memphis Grizzlies, who elected to move on from Desmond Bane. And a lot of people surmise that that deal was a conduit to potentially a breakdown where they might just be patient and wait for Oklahoma City to maybe have to make some difficult financial decisions. Because Oklahoma City at this point has not had to pay some of their main pieces. Now, what Sam Presti has done to build this thing up is given them the ability and the flexibility, if we put it honestly, to build around their core 3 with draft picks and kind of cheap labor is the way I put it, because that's what it is when you draft a player and you have him under contract for 3, if not 4 years at a rookie salary scale. It's kind of like what the Seahawks did with Russell Wilson on his rookie contract as a quarterback that they didn't have to pay very much. So they had an awesome defense, great offensive line, great running back, and they won a Super Bowl, should have won 2. So it's tough to read the tea leaves as far as what it's going to look like for Oklahoma City moving forward. They will have to pay Jalen Williams, who, by the way, you drop a 40-piece in the NBA Finals, that changes who you are on the ecosystem of pro basketball. You know, one of the things about OKC all year long is we knew they were historic. We knew Shea was awesome. You know, he was going to be in the mix for MVP. He was a year ago. Then the debate between SGA and Jokic going back and forth, left and right. So the question was, do they have a legitimate number 2 who can step up during the playoffs to help them win a championship? And Jalen Williams has answered that question with an emphatic yes. Those 2 players, meaning SGA and Jalen, 4th most points in NBA Finals history so far, just for a 1-2 punch. And it's names like Jordan and Pippen, Shaq and Kobe, Durant and Curry, and even LeBron and Kyrie back, I think that was 16-17 when they won the championship. Rarefied air for this 1-2 punch that Oklahoma City has on their roster that have really grown and understood how to play together. And the other player they're going to pay is Chet, who currently is on his rookie contract as well. So Shea is on the books for $35.8 as a result of him winning MVP and being first-team All-NBA. He's eligible for a Supermax extension. Chet, I think, has one more year maybe left on his rookie deal. He made $10.8 million this year. And then you look at Jalen, I mean, on his rookie contract, $4.7 million for a player that just dropped 40 in the NBA Finals. So they're going to have to extend Chet. They're going to have to extend Jalen, and they're going to have to pay those 2. And that's going to be an expensive roster at some point. I don't know that I love the parallel that a lot of people are making between these 3 and the 3 that Sam Presti had and drafted back in the day, namely Durant, Westbrook, and Harden. You know, Harden simply wanted a bigger role, and a lot of people questioned whether or not that was the right thing, and it turned out to be the right thing. He won the MVP, and, of course, has been a linchpin in other places. Say what you want about him during his heyday and during his heightened offensive brilliance. He was one of the hardest players to guard in the NBA. So if you go back to that point, and certainly it's hard to understand whether or not Shea, Chet, and Jalen kind of have the same dynamic as Durant, Westbrook, and Harden, because those 3 allowed ego to get in the way, right? And look, we all want to get paid. And if you can leverage your skill set into a bigger paycheck, you should go do that. And that's what Harden did. Eventually, Durant just realized he was not going to be able to beat those guys in the Bay, so he joined them, leaving Westbrook as a standalone player and talent in Oklahoma City, where he won an MVP, but they were never a serious contender after those other two left. And obviously, we remember that here, watching Ricky Rubio essentially outplay Russell Westbrook during that great series where the Jazz beat that second iteration of a super team or whatever it was with Melo, Paul George, and Russell Westbrook. So it'll be interesting to see how this team continues to manifest itself moving forward once Sam Presti and Oklahoma City's ownership have some tough decisions to make with the economics and the finances, because that's the deal now with this new CBA. It is designed, actually, for teams that exist in a place like Salt Lake City at some point to have a window opened up so they can compete with the other big dogs. Adam Silver has been very adamant at his desire to not have any more dynasties or not have any more super teams that are around for 4, 5, 6, 7 years, to essentially tilt the landscape of competition in the NBA. And that's why Indiana in the NBA Finals, Sam Presti, Oklahoma City in the NBA Finals. Now, anytime I draw a parallel, and I actually am starting to think the Indiana blueprint is something that's a little more relevant for the Jazz to look at, or Jazz fans to kind of study to understand how this thing can actually go if you make some right decisions. I mean, we talk all the time about the fact that the Jazz have never had Lady Luck shine upon them during the NBA draft process, and it didn't shine upon them this year either. Unfortunately, even though the odds were that they were going to draft at 5, we were all sitting there watching the draft lottery with our fingers crossed, hoping they would rise to 1 and therefore draft a cornerstone in Cooper Flagg that you have something to build around, right? But Indiana does not have high draft picks on their roster either. And they were able to go about this without needing a total teardown. They were able to stay competitive. They never manipulated minutes or lost on purpose or tanked in order to get draft lottery luck. Now, they made tremendous decisions that turned out to be really, really good. And as we've talked about before, this NBA Finals is interesting for a number of reasons, but namely, both of these two teams once upon a time had Paul George as their cornerstone, and both of these two teams turned Paul George into the franchise pieces they have now. Oklahoma City turned Paul George into Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, other pieces, a grip of draft picks. One of those draft picks has turned out to be Jalen Williams. Indiana turned Paul George into Domantas Sabonis and some other pieces. It was Victor Oladipo, if I remember correctly, and then they turn around and trade Sabonis to Sacramento, where they land Tyrese Halliburton, right? So Indiana, namely Indiana specifically, has not had to grab a number 1 overall pick, draft a Victor Wembanyama, draft a Cooper Flagg, draft a LeBron James, whatever it is. Now, I don't think they're going to win a championship, but they're in the finals in a small market with a roster that if we look at closely, we can maybe learn a thing or two about how Austin Ainge can build this thing for the Utah Jazz. Now, the bottom line is this. I continue to say it. Whether you're drafting 1 or whether you're drafting in the second round, the fact of the matter is you have to get the best value possible for that pick in its slot. And when Indiana has had these draft picks, they have been able to knock them out of the park. I mean, Benedict Mathurin, who was the Pac-12 Player of the Year, he was a lottery pick, but he was not a top 2 or 3 pick. And then they were able to find players that were kind of thrown aside, left off the scrap heap. Aaron Nesmith, who could not get off the bench in Boston, player like Andrew Nembhard. I mean, you grab those players. The Knicks had to make a salary decision about Obi Toppin. Obi's been much better for Indianapolis than he ever was for New York. And then finally, the main piece of the puzzle, and I'll kind of call this the Mike Conley dynamic, because what Dennis Lindsey did when he realized he had a good young team that was going in the right direction was expedite the growth by trading for the right veteran piece to kind of calm the locker room, be a great teammate, and be a really, really good player, because that's who Mike Conley is. And that's what Indiana did with Pascal Siakam. So Toronto was able to grab a championship when they took advantage of the fact that Kawhi Leonard wanted out of San Antonio. And even though Kawhi wanted Los Angeles, Greg Popovich was not going to trade him to where he wanted to go. He was just going to get the best deal possible. And that best deal possible turned out to be the deal he made with Toronto. And so Toronto wins the championship with Kawhi as the centerpiece. But Pascal Siakam was their second best player. You can make an argument for some other pieces. He was an all-star. And so when Indiana realized that they had this young group and a cornerstone in Tyrese Halliburton, they went all in to acquire the veteran piece to get them over the top. I don't know that they knew that he was going to get them over the top the way that he has, but Pascal Siakam has been as important as any other player not named Tyrese Halliburton. So as the Jazz sit here, and we're 1 week away from the draft with the number 5 pick, the number 21 pick, and 2 second-rounders, this is an interesting roster to study because I just don't think the Oklahoma City Thunder model is fair to bring up based off of how brilliant Sam Presti has gone about his business. I mean, and by the way, when you look at this, Sam Presti has been building this thing up and with different iterations for 17 years. This isn't something that happens overnight. But I have a hard time drawing a parallel between Austin Ainge and his project and what Oklahoma City has built up, because Oklahoma City is like the gold standard, not just for right now, but really for the past 10, 15 years in roster construction and pro basketball. I would not be stunned if Indiana wins tomorrow at home and we have a Game 7 in Oklahoma City. Here's the problem. In Oklahoma City, I think I read today they've played 146 minutes, and OKC has led for 143 of those minutes. Now, Indiana's had the lead for the majority of their home court time frame, but it's not near tilted the way it is down in OKC. The Tyrese Halliburton thing is interesting. A lot of people are going to be pining for more T.J. McConnell minutes because he really was so good in a truncated space in Game 5. I hesitate to lean into that entirely. While I give T.J. a ton of credit, the audacity for that kid to believe he can play pro basketball and play it at a high level, he plays against backups most of the time, and there's a reason why he's a backup. I'm not taking anything away from what he did in Game 5. But if you just simply swap Tyrese Halliburton for T.J. McConnell, you know what Mark Daigneault does? He puts Lou Dort on T.J. McConnell. You know how that's going to go? Yeah, it's not going to go well. So NBA Finals, Game 6 tomorrow. Of course, you can hear it on this radio station. And we'll talk more NBA coming up on the other side. Tony Jones bats leadoff today. Then it's Neil Smith. It's Tim Bontemps. It's Josh Furlong. We'll go from there on a Wednesday edition of the program. You are halfway through your work week. You're one day closer to the weekend, so keep it right here on ESPN 700. All right, Neil Smith stops by, his weekly hit. Talk some pro hockey in a bit. NBA Finals, Game 6 tomorrow. NBA Draft 1 week from today. Nobody better than our next guest to break it all down. Tony Jones from The Athletic. TJ, happy Wednesday, buddy. How we doing?
Happy Wednesday. How you doing?
I'm good, brother. Appreciate the time today. All right, so let's start with the news that Tyrese Halliburton is questionable for the game tomorrow night. Now, we all saw what TJ McConnell was able to do in Game 5. Now, look, TJ is an excellent backup point guard, Tony, but to me, he is just that. He is a backup point guard. Oftentimes, he plays up against other backups, and you and I both know what will happen if he starts. Mark Dagnall just 6 Lou Dort on him, and he will not be able to breathe. So let's start with the premise that Halliburton does not go tomorrow night. What does that say to you about how that game might go?
Well, I mean, he wouldn't. TJ McConnell won't start whether Halliburton plays or not. If Halliburton doesn't play, you just slide Andrew Nembhard over to the point, and maybe you slide Benedict Mathurin or somebody else into the starting lineup. TJ McConnell is a 6-man. He's not a starter. And what's more than that, if you play him over a certain amount of minutes, then, once you get over that certain amount of minutes, his productivity goes way down. So, he's a guy that you're going to play 20, 25 minutes a night, no matter who's in the starting lineup and who's on the floor. I'm of the opinion that Halliburton should not play tomorrow. Calf strains are the most dangerous injury that you can have because there's only one way you can go from a calf strain. And I think that we all know what that way is. That's a torn Achilles. In 2019, famously, Kevin Durant played on a calf strain, tore his Achilles. And so it's not worth risking what is the most debilitating injury a basketball player can have, even in a finals game. So, the fact that it's a calf strain, whether it's grade 1, grade 2, or whatever, I'm of the opinion that Halliburton probably should not play tomorrow. And, obviously, if he doesn't play tomorrow, then, this series is in real peril for the Indiana Pacers. Because they've struggled to take care of the basketball against Oklahoma City, even with Halliburton on the floor, and Halliburton never turns the basketball over. So without him on the floor, it probably becomes much more of a struggle and much more of an issue to handle the ball against that Oklahoma City defense.
I'm glad you said that because I agree that if there and look, this is a tough thing, right? Because Tyrese Halliburton himself, prior to Game 5, when asked about how he was feeling, he said, "It's the NBA Finals. I've worked for this my entire life." And TJ, you know this. I mean, there have been so many players throughout the landscape of pro basketball that have been able to reach the NBA Finals like once, and then they never get back there the rest of their career. So I get it as far as his desire to play through injury, but I've always been of the mindset, especially when the stakes are this high, like, dude, if you're hurt, you got to sit. Sorry, like it sucks. Injuries are part of this thing. So what do you think it looks like if he does actually push the needle a little bit and says, this is my lifelong dream, I got to go tonight?
Well, the conundrum is this. Even if he plays, he's not going to be effective.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, we all saw – he played in Game 5 in the second half with the calf strain. And what did we see? We saw Tyrese Halliburton that couldn't push off, couldn't extend, couldn't get by anybody. He struggles to get by people, at 100%. He's not the quickest guard in isolation situations. So even when he played with the calf strain, he was rendered completely ineffective. So, look, I would say this if I were Indiana. I would say you're sitting in Game 6. Let's try to go out in Game 6 and get Game 6 for you. The game is at home. We can, maybe we get an outlier, Benedict Mathurin type 27-point game from one of our role players. and we bring this home for you, and then let's see how you respond over the next 2 days for Game 7. But when you have a calf strain, I mean, this isn't about pain tolerance, anything strain, muscle strain, a hamstring strain, a calf strain, the human body just can't, it's just hard to deal with. So I just really think that, the Pacers need to save Halliburton from himself, so to speak, and, just sit him tomorrow night, see what happens tomorrow night. Obviously there's a real chance they lose that game, but if they win, you have an extra 2 days before Game 7, and you can see, with round the clock care, how it responds for Game 7, because I do think that there's a small chance that, the Pacers can get Game 6 at home without Halliburton. I think there's zero chance they can get Game 7 on the road without him.
Yeah, no, I do agree with that. All right, the Oklahoma City side of this. So, one of the questions all year long, TJ, as you know, was, all right, Shai's awesome. We get it. He was going to be in the mix for MVP. He was second a year ago. It was, do they have a Scottie Pippen? Do they have a Kyrie Irving? Do they have that second fiddle? I'll let you decide who the second fiddle was between Shaq and Kobe. I'm not touching that one, or Durant or Steph or whatever. What has Jalen Williams' performance said to you about who he is right now and how good he can be as he progresses?
Well, Kobe was definitely second fiddle to Shaq. I mean, that's the reason why Shaq won all three of the Finals MVPs. He was the number one guy. But what Jalen Williams has accomplished is he's answered a lot of questions. And, it was a big question. Was Jalen Williams a number two capable of, getting a team to a championship? And the answer has been a definitive yes, especially in these finals. I think that there's a world where Jalen Williams should win Finals MVP if he has another big game in a closeout game. So, he's been terrific. He figured out, pretty early on in the series that nobody could stay in front of him for the Pacers. And, he's carried that confidence, to the basket. And that's, stoked his confidence away from the basket as well. He's made shots. He's a terrific defensive player. And, he puts, he's got a 7'2" wingspan. So, it's hard for him. It's hard for opponents to isolate him because he's so active with his hands. He's a tough guy. He's just a terrific all-around player. And he's saved his best basketball for the Western Conference Finals and the NBA Finals. He was okay against the Denver Nuggets in the Western Conference semifinals. He was, there were a couple of games where he was really good, but then there were a couple of games where he really disappeared. He was terrific against Minnesota in the Western Conference Finals, and he's been even better in the NBA Finals against Indiana. So he's really kind of ramped up as the playoffs have gone along, and the crescendo is that he's been unguardable in this series.
All right, so I was talking about this earlier, and we'll get to the Memphis trade. We'll get to the Jazz stuff in a minute. And I just don't know that it's fair to Austin Ainge or, quite frankly, any other roster constructor to say, okay, look at the Sam Presti model, look at the OKC model, because that has been so brilliantly executed, quite frankly, with different iterations over the course of 17 years, dating back to Seattle when they drafted Durant and Westbrook. Then they had the Westbrook, Durant, Harden, Ibaka situation, and Harden wanted more usage. He wanted a bigger role. Some people rolled their eyes. Well, Harden was right. He went on to win an MVP. Durant, Westbrook break up. Durant goes to Golden State, and then Westbrook is kind of left as this lone soldier. And, they tried the Carmelo Anthony, Paul George thing. And if you go back and look at every transaction that Sam Presti has made, he's batting like 90%. It is wild. So I hesitate to lean into that model to tell Jazz fans like maybe Austin could do something like this. But Tony, is there something with what Indiana has done that the Jazz fans can look at? Like if you just go down, Ben Shepherd was the 26th overall pick. Benedict Mather in their highest draft pick was 6 in 2022. Miles Turner was a lottery pick way back in the day. He was the 11th pick. But they have not utilized the draft to build this thing up. And they have not needed a top 3 pick or a number 1 overall pick to build this up. Is there something we can learn about the process Austin has in front of him based off of how Indiana has been able to do this?
Well, I think that the thing that you can learn and take away is that, every rebuilding process is linear, and there's no one right way to rebuild. I think Oklahoma City's model was a little bit unsustainable because they traded for a guy who would end up being MVP. You're just not going to trade for future MVPs very often. So every move that they made had that baseline of having Shai Gilgeous-Alexander as the guy. Now that being said, some of Sam Presti's moves have just been awesome. I mean, finding Lou Dort as he was undrafted, getting Aaron Wiggins, the Alex Caruso heist, like that. I don't even look at it as a trade. I look at it as a heist. Looking at that, drafting Jalen Williams 12th, when, a whole bunch of teams that could have drafted him probably passed on him, and then becoming the team that takes on bad contracts for everybody's picks. And, so now what you have is a team that's, not only a championship caliber team right now, obviously, but really set up for the future. So if you look at Indiana, their fortunes changed when they traded an all-star for a potential all-star. They traded DeMontis Sabonis for Tyrese Halliburton, and that changed everything. He came in, and he just changed the way the road for that team. And then trading for Pascal Siakam, that gave Indiana a second all-star / all-NBA level player. And then they kind of took off. And then, you go and you hire Rick Carlisle, who I think is one of the 10 best coaches who's ever lived. And he installs a system that makes it very difficult for them to play against. And, they've done things on the margins as well, getting Nembhard, in the second round, trading for Aaron Nesmith when he couldn't get time in Boston to start his career, getting Ben Shepherd getting Ben Shepherd off the scrap heap as well, figuring out a way to really unlock TJ McConnell to unlock that second unit. So both of those front offices have, made shrewd and smart moves, and they've been shrewd and smart with their finances. And, they've both built 2 great teams, and they've both built those 2 teams in pretty significantly different ways.
All right, we'll end with some Jazz stuff, but since you and I last spoke, kind of an unexpected, random, but big trade for a number of different reasons. The Orlando Magic will be very, very relevant in the Eastern Conference next year, as they've acquired Desmond Bane from the Memphis Grizzlies for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who just didn't play very well for them after leaving the Denver Nuggets. Cole Anthony, who's a rotational piece. You can play Cole, and then 4 unprotected first-round picks and a swap. What does this say to you, Tony, about the mentality of the Memphis Grizzlies, and where, in your opinion, does it put Orlando in the ecosystem of the Eastern Conference?
Well, with Orlando, I mean, Desmond Bane is a perfect third person for Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner. The one thing, Orlando was one of the worst shooting teams in the league this year from three. And adding a shooter with size like Desmond Bane is going to be a real godsend for them. And the thing about Desmond, he can play with or without the ball in his hands. He's a tough guy. He's a really good defender and point of attack. He can create off the dribble. He's an efficient shooter, and he's an efficient shooter on volume. I mean, he's a really, really good third guy. And if Jalen Suggs is back and healthy, and that group stays healthy, then I expect Orlando to be one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference next year. The thing with Memphis, I think that it was a no-brainer trade for them because of the haul that they got. That was a very expensive trade for Orlando to make. It was, 4 first-round picks, and then obviously, you get KCP and you get Cole Anthony back as well. But the picks are going to give them flexibility. It's going to give them added financial flexibility in order to pay Jaren Jackson Jr. I don't know what they do from here, whether they just keep the team as is or if they kind of break it down a little bit further. But, in my estimation, I would go and I would look and see what the market is for Ja Morant because I think that, Memphis has gone as far as it's going to go with Morant as its leader. So I would look and see, what the market is for that and what kind of offers I can garner for that. And, I think I keep Jaren Jackson Jr. Just because of how unique he is and how young he still is. But I definitely look at what I can see and see what I can get for Ja Morant.
All right, Tony, let's move over to some Jazz stuff now, and we are 1 week away from the NBA draft. Interesting narrative surrounding Ace Bailey over the past 72 hours or so, where Sam Vecini, who works over for you, and then Jonathan Givony, who's on ESPN side of things, they both indicate that maybe the market is cooling on him a little bit. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, so I wanted to start there, and then just the latest understanding of who the Jazz are looking at right now to take number 5, depending, of course, as far as who's on the board.
Well, Ace is really polarizing because he's very, very talented, and he's a guy that I think is has a real ceiling of an All-NBA type player, but his floor is just very low. Like, I think his floor is Cam Reddish, and that's just on the floor, because he takes if you look at just basketball-wise, he has some real flaws that are concerning, right? Like, he takes a ton of bad shots because he doesn't have a tight handle. He's a guy who doesn't pass the ball at all. You go and look at his assist rate. It's super low. Like, you're supposed to, for a guy who handles the ball as much as he does, he's supposed to average 3 assists a game, just swinging the ball around the perimeter and getting random assists. And, he just doesn't do that. He's not a passer at all. So, I mean, just looking off of that, he's polarizing just off of that. But the intel stuff is real. Like, the guys that he's surrounded with, the people that he's surrounded with, it's just super concerning. And, when, I know the Twitter narrative is that, the draft, you have people who talk and this and that. This stuff around Ace is real. Like, it's as real as it gets. And teams are scared to death to draft him. But the funny thing is they're scared to death to pass him up as well. Because what if they pass him up and he actually becomes Tracy McGrady, or he becomes, somebody who, is an All-NBA caliber guy? Then you look stupid and then you lose your job. So because of that, he's one of the more polarizing prospects that I've seen in a good while. So the Philadelphia 76ers is going to work him out tomorrow. I don't expect him to go to Philly. I don't expect him to go to Charlotte. I think he's in the conversation with the Jazz at 5, even though the Jazz have some significant concerns about him. But we'll see where he lands. I think because of his talent, it's hard for me to see him slipping out of the top 8 to 10. But he's a guy that, if he had great intel, then he'd be no question the third pick of this draft. And, I don't think that he's going to end up being the third pick of this draft because his intel is as shaky as it is.
All right. So if we are sitting here on draft night and the number 5 pick is announced and the Utah Jazz take Con Knippel, if he's there at 5, what would your reaction be?
My reaction would be that Con Knippel was the best player that on Utah's board, and I think that's who they're going to draft. The highs and lows of Con Knippel, or the pros and cons of Con Knippel, are this. I think the Con Knippel is going to be a guy who averages 18 to 20 points per game, over a really long career. And, I think that he's going to be a really good player in the NBA for a long time. Now, the cons are, I don't think Con Knippel is going to be a star or a superstar. I think he's going to be a very high-level role player. So the question is, if you are a Jazz fan, does it hurt that your team lost 65 games, many of them on purpose, and went through the pain that you went through to draft a guy who has a ceiling of a really high-level role player? So,
Tone? He dropped. Hello, Tony Jones. All right. Well,
he didn't technically drop, but he's not coming through.
Okay, fair enough. We'll let him go. Oh, wait. Hello. He's there. Did you just dive into a swimming pool with your headphones on? What happened?
No, I have no idea what happened.
Okay. All right. Well,
can you hear me?
I got you now. I got one more thing for you, then I'll set you loose. There have been a lot of conversations about what Brian Windhorst said on his SportsCenter hit, where he essentially said he's been told the Jazz are really going to try to ramp up the rebuild. I don't know what that means. It just feels like something to say. So before I set you loose, we have 2 interesting directions, right? And over the past, 4 or 5 days or whatever, since Brian said that on SportsCenter, I've had several guests on, Tom Haberstroh, Smitty in studio, and we debated the 2 directions that seem to be in front of the Utah Jazz. In one direction, and Windhorst is plugged in, I'm not calling him a liar, of course, but one direction is to ramp up the rebuild by trying to find a veteran player or 2 to add to this group to take a couple of steps forward. And then the other possibility that's been floated out there by like Bill Simmons and Kevin O'Connor and others are the Jazz engaging with San Antonio for something like Markkanen in 5, for Harrison Barnes, Keldon Johnson in 2, and you take Dylan Harper and you continue to long game this thing, instead of expediting the growth in the process. What direction do you think the Jazz should or will go in?
From what I know, the Jazz are going to be fluid with this, and, they can go either direction. It just all depends on, what's available for them and, what makes sense for them. I think that they're comfortable with going in either direction at this point. I will tell you this. I think the owner wants the front office to make them better, because I think Ryan does not want to go through another year like this. And I think that that's going to be a really interesting dynamic in terms of what direction the Jazz ultimately take. So I do think that it's possible that the Jazz do go out and try to trade for a high-impact veteran and try to be better right away. But I still do think it's possible that they continue to strip things down. They trade Colin Sexton. They find a taker for Jordan Clarkson. They find a taker for John Collins, and go out next year and set themselves up to keep their top 8 protected pick, which is slated to go to Oklahoma City. So it makes sense. The sense that it makes sense to be bad and keep that pick, because I'm telling you right now that the 2026 NBA draft, and I've said this before, it's one of the best that I've ever evaluated. And I think that at the end of the day, we're talking, this could be on par with the 2003, 1996, and 1984 drafts. I think it has a chance that draft next year has a chance to be that good. So I think if you're the Jazz, it makes sense to be one of the 8 worst teams and to keep that pick. But it also makes sense to, be better and give your fans a better product. So it's going to be a really interesting scenario to see, what direction the Jazz ultimately move in. But I do think that we're going to start to get some answers pretty soon here.
All right, TJ, thanks for the time, man. Have a great week, and we'll get you on before the draft next week, okay?
Yes, sir. I appreciate you.
Tony Jones covers the NBA and the Utah Jazz for The Athletic, does a lot of draft stuff as well. If you're looking for any of TJ's insight, find it on Twitter at TJones on the NBA. We have some breaking news before we catch a break. Okay, fair enough. One of our guests might need a pump fake, and totally understandable. According to Sham Charania from ESPN, the Buss family is entering an agreement to sell majority ownership of the Los Angeles Lakers to Mark Walter, who's the CEO and chairman of the diversified holding company TWG Global. Sources tell ESPN Jeannie Buss will continue to serve in a role as governor after the sale. The Celtics were sold earlier this year. Now the Lakers are sold. Boston fetched a record $6.1 billion price tag. My guess is the Lakers are closer to $8 billion. We'll see. That is so stupid. That is crazy money. When the official terms are released, we'll bring them to you. But the Buss family, of course, Dr. Jerry Buss, the original owner of the Lakers, they have owned the Lakers for, I think, like 40, 50 years. They are selling the majority ownership of the Lakers to Mark Walter. More on this later on. We'll see if we can grab Tim Bontemps. He might be a busy boy. But we will shift gears. And coming up on the other side, the Florida Panthers have raised Lord Stanley's Cup. The Utah Mammoth are drafting 4th overall. Sam Bennett, unrestricted free agent. Neil Smith will stop by to talk hockey. And then we'll see if we can get Timmy. Maybe not. Josh Furlong stops by later on to talk some Utes football and basketball. Busy Wednesday show. You got it dialed into The Drive with Spence Checketts on ESPN 700, 92.1 FM. We are proud to be part of Utah's ESPN radio network. Following the breaking news, according to Shams Charania, that the Buss family is entering an agreement to sell the majority ownership of the Los Angeles Lakers to Mark Walter, who's the CEO and chairman of the diversified holding company TWG Global. Jeannie Buss will continue to serve in her role as governor after the sale. The Celtics were sold earlier this year. Now the Lakers, the two charter franchises in professional basketball. We're going to try to get Tim Bontemps on later on, but Tim, of course, understandably, is now very, very busy. So we may have to pivot. We'll let you know. Going to bring in Josh Furlong for the latest on the University of Utah football, basketball programs, how's the NCAA, college football, that fun stuff. But the Florida Panthers are your Stanley Cup champs for the second straight year. They beat the Edmonton Oilers. Our next guest joins us consistently to break down the world of pro hockey. It's the great Neil Smith on a Wednesday afternoon. Neil, happy Wednesday, sir. How are you?
Good. Happy Wednesday to you, too. I'm doing just fine. Thank you.
I appreciate the time. So, last year's series was really interesting. Florida wins 3, Edmonton wins 3, Florida gets game 7. The way I'll start our conversation today is, at what point during the Stanley Cup final did you start to get the sense that Edmonton was up against it and this was Florida's cup to raise?
Oh, very early. I honestly thought very early in the series, and you've got to understand too that I'm in Florida. I had been picking Florida to win the cup since the regular season.
Yes, you have.
So I thought when they came out of Edmonton 1-1, I thought, oh, look out, because that's all the Panthers needed. Those were 2 overtime games, if you remember, the first 2 games of the series. And then Florida just put just kicked them out in game 3, 6-1. And then we go to game 4 in Florida, and it's another overtime game, but this time Edmonton wins. So if you look at it the way I did, Florida could have already ended the series at that time if they'd gotten any bounces, but now it was 2-2 at that point. But then what really told the thing was once the Panthers jumped all over them in Edmonton. I didn't think there was much way that there was much chance that they wouldn't beat them in Florida when they don't want to make that 5.5-hour flight and 2,900 miles back to Edmonton for Game 7. And that's exactly what they did. I mean, they just were better than them in every aspect of the game last night.
We were discussing earlier, as the NBA Finals will resume tomorrow between Oklahoma City and Indiana, how the front offices of both teams have gone about their business to build the roster that now has these 2 teams competing for the biggest prize in pro basketball. I would imagine Bill Zito. I don't know, but ultimately I wondered if you could shed some light on how he and his staff have built this club that has now won back-to-back Stanley Cup trophies.
They back in 2022, they won the President's Trophy and got eliminated by Tampa Bay, their cross-state rival, pretty quickly in the second round. And Bill Zito decided to change coaches because that was the year that Joel Quenneville had to resign because of the problem that had happened in Chicago years before. And so, and his assistant coach became the head coach, and they still went on to win the President's Trophy, but they didn't play well. Obviously, they didn't go very far in the playoffs. And he did 2 things that summer that have changed the whole franchise. He hired Paul Maurice as his head coach under a little bit of criticism from people because Paul Maurice had been in Winnipeg for many years and was thought of as pretty bland. And the other thing that he did was he made a trade with Calgary to bring in Matthew Tkachuk, and he traded away a really popular guy in Huberdeau and a good defenseman, Weegar. And Matthew Tkachuk and the way he plays has basically changed that franchise around to the point that of what you see now, because they added to that guys like Sam Bennett, Brad Marchand this year. And that whole team is like a rat pack. Like they just play as a team incredibly well. I mean, you got to give that credit also to Paul Maurice and the way he coaches that team. But they're a team's team. I mean, they watch out for each other. They're on top of every puck. They win all their board battles. They do all the right things. And so the other part that you've got to give Bill Zito high marks for is that after last year's Stanley Cup, as will happen probably this year, he lost, 3 or 4 pretty good players that had been good for him to win the Stanley Cup in 24. Brandon Montour, the defenseman who logged a lot of ice time, went to Seattle. Oliver Ekman-Larsson signed in Toronto. Their backup goalie, Stolarz, signed in Toronto. And so they took losses. But Bill Zito turned around and saw there was an opportunity to get Seth Jones out of Chicago, who wanted out of Chicago because they were losing all the time. Jones has been a real good defenseman on Nashville when he first broke in, traded to Columbus, good on that team and good on Chicago. But those are all teams that really weren't of a high caliber. And so you wondered, would Seth Jones be able to be as good on a good team as he was on these weak teams? Well, he came in and he was even better for Florida Panthers than he was on Chicago or on Columbus. And that added to a defense that already had Ekblad and others that were playing great, like Nate Schmidt has played out of his mind this year. And then at the deadline, he picks up Brad Marchand, who, was long in the tooth at 37, always played feisty. A lot of people thought was slowing down. And you add Brad Marchand to the third line, where he was a first liner in Boston. And all of a sudden, you've got these layers of players coming at the opposition. And as you saw, Brad Marchand was probably second in the Conn Smythe Trophy voting to Sam Bennett, who set the record for most goals in the playoffs on the road. So Bill Zito has been able to he's been able to do everything right. Every move he's made has turned out well for them. And even back in getting guys off waivers back a number of years ago, Forsling, who plays a ton of ice time on their defense, he got on waivers. So, he's done a remarkable job with the Florida Panthers.
So over to the Edmonton takeaways here. Oftentimes in any sport, you look at, the most talented, best player in that sport, and you say things like, well, he's too good not to win a cup, too good not to win a Super Bowl, too good not to win a championship. And that feels like Connor McDavid narrative in pro hockey. I mean, it feels like he's just so good at some point he'll break through. But this is the second straight year that they have fallen short in that endeavor at the hand of the very same club. What do you think the offseason looks like in Edmonton? What do they have to do to maybe surround McDavid and Draisaitl, obviously others, to maybe take the last step they need to potentially be the first Canadian team to lift the cup in 32 years?
Yeah, since 1993. It'll be 33 years next year. So I think what this says to me, and I've known this for quite a while, but it's very evident with this Edmonton team, is that even though you've got arguably the two best players in the league, and I say arguably because you could argue that Kucherov or McKinnon are better than Draisaitl. Nobody's going to argue that McDavid's not the best player in the league, I don't think, unless they are, on something. But so you've got those two players, but you don't have as good a team as Florida has. And that's what I think separates hockey from or NHL from NBA. I think in NBA, I know in NBA, if you have LeBron James, you've got a real good chance, not maybe at winning the title, but certainly at contending with the big boys. And if you add a second guy who's, let's say, a notch under LeBron James, now you're really powerful. That doesn't hold up in hockey. In hockey, you only, you go out once every fourth shift, once every third shift. If you're a star, you're on the ice for 45 seconds. But that whole team has to be in sync. And the Oilers are just not as good a team as the Panthers, even though they have two franchise players on their one team. So what have they got to do? They got to sit back and analyze how they're going to surround these two guys going forward. I think they did a real good job of that between Ken Holland and Stan Bowman this year. But it's not easy, as we know, right? It's not easy to have great defensemen and great forwards. I mean, Matthias Ekholm, who is a player badly missed by the Oilers when he's out of the lineup, he was hurt near the end of the season a little bit, and they were dying for him to get back in the lineup. He had a horrible Game 5 and Game 6. Horrible. Guys jumped over him and went in and scored. And so there's obviously an injury there with him. But they're going to have to, sit back and analyze what ingredient they need more of and what ingredient they need less of. They've got a number of free agents, including Trent Frederick and Connor Brown, Corey Perry, and they're going to have to decide who they want to keep out of that. Brad Marchand, too. Who do they want to keep? I'm sorry, I said Brad Marchand. He's from Florida. I made a mistake. But Frederick and Brown and Corey Perry, they're going to have to decide who they want to spend money on and who they're going to let go.
I don't have to tell you this, Neil, but only 5 teams have ever won 3 consecutive Stanley Cups. The Maple Leafs did it twice. The Montreal Canadiens did it twice. And the New York Islanders, as you are aware of, are the most recent team to do it from 1980 to 1983. No other team in the expansion era has won more than 2 cups in a row. Vegas already has odds for next season because, of course, they do. And Florida is among the favorites to win the cup again next year. In addition to Florida, we're looking at Edmonton is on the list, Carolina, or Colorado. Those are the 4 teams as of now that have the best odds to hoist the cup next year. Do you think the Panthers have it in them to win their 3rd straight, or do you like one of the other 3 favorites, Edmonton, Carolina, or Colorado?
I definitely think Florida has it in them, but, there's a lot of runway between here and there, and a lot of things can go wrong. A lot of injuries, a lot of people get older. They don't have the same legs in 26 that they had in 25. Bobrovsky is not a youngster anymore. He's getting up there. We just talked about Brad Marchand being 37. So and I'm not saying they won't win it. I think that, in my mind, they're the favorite right now, but there's a lot of things that can go wrong. And if they could pull off a 3rd straight cup, I would be startled, because I know how many things can go wrong, and I know how difficult it is. And even the Sidney Crosby Penguins couldn't get it done when they were in their prime with Malkin and Letang. And they won 2, as you know, in 16 and 17, couldn't get the 3rd one. It's very, very difficult now because you take losses in the offseason to free agency, and you're not always going to be able to pull the rabbits out of your hat that Bill Zito was able to do this year.
So Sam Bennett wins the Conn Smythe. And, Neil, we've talked about this before. He's an unrestricted free agent, and the Utah Hockey Club has about $23 million in cap space during their offseason project. He just feels like he would be so perfect for the Utah Mammoth out this way. If you're Florida, it's probably hard to let a Conn Smythe Trophy winner leave, but they have some financial decisions to make as well. What do you think the future for Sam Bennett holds, and do you think there's even a slight possibility the future holds potentially a role with the Utah Mammoth?
I think Sam Bennett's future is going to be rich. I think he's going to make a lot of money wherever he goes. I think the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to be very interested in trying to get him. And he's a Canadian kid. It's always hard for me, being an old school person, to see picture Sam Bennett not in a Florida uniform, because he's been so successful with Florida. It will be up to him, his preference of what he wants to do. Does he want to stay with his teammates that he's won these 2 cups with and keep trying to ride that and maybe take a little less money because of the fact that they don't have the cap space that Utah has? Or does he want to go and get a huge contract from whoever will pay him the most? He would be a good player and an impactful player on any team. that signs him. And he would make a huge impact on Utah if they were to get him, because he's that kind of guy. He's you know how he plays. He's so gritty and so intense, and yet has his skill set as well. Even last night, I marveled at his skating ability to go through the neutral zone and deke guys and then hand the puck off at the right time. He's going to be one of the most sought-after free agents this summer, along with Brock Besser and of course Mitch Marner that we've talked about coming out of Toronto.
All right, Neil, I thought about you when the story broke that the Stanley Cup is a little banged up thanks to the Florida Panthers celebration of their second straight Stanley Cup title. Just totally out of curiosity, as somebody that ran a club that lifted a Stanley Cup, what's the dynamic like when the team gets the cup? And how do you decide, okay, the coach gets it this day and the player wants it that day? And are there rules that you put into place to make sure that the Stanley Cup is returned in good condition?
Well, I hope they do now, because it was because of the 1994 New York Rangers that Phil Pritchard follows and travels with the Stanley Cup and doesn't let it out of his sight. Because with our players, and I probably shouldn't name who the player was, but it was Stefan Matteau. He took the cup to Quebec on his turn. The top came off because, as you know, the bowl on the top and a little bit of the neck is the original trophy. And there's something that goes up the middle of the trophy that connects that cup to the rest of the base. And it came off when he had it. Somebody tried to solder it back on. And I got the cup next and was horrified of what I saw. And when the league found out about this, that was the end of the players getting the cup by themselves. On the logistics, what we did was our PR guy orchestrated it with the captains and that, and on who got it when and who wanted it when and who, what went on with that. And I would imagine it's the same thing now. I imagine that Sasha Barkov will have a big say in orchestrating that, and so will the assistant captains. In not that they get it first, but in saying, okay, what's the right way to do this? Where should it go? But that's a ways off now, because these guys will have it, celebrating it in Fort Lauderdale for quite a bit right now. The parade and the bars and everything else where the Stanley Cup travels. But yeah, we did a number on that. I can't say I did it, but we did our team certainly ruined it for everybody else. Did
you attempt, or anyone with the organization, to implement any rules as these young players, young men, went on their way with the Stanley Cup, understanding that there probably was going to be some booze involved and all that?
Yeah, here's the thing, though, with us, Spence. We had Mark Messier as a captain who had already won it 5 times. And we had Kevin Lowe, who had already won it 5 times. So we had Glenn Anderson, who'd already won it 5 times. And we had Esa Tikkanen that had won 4 times. And Craig McTavish that had won it 3 or 4 times. So these guys knew how to do this. And I remember when Mark said to me at the party right after the game, we're going to take this over to auction house. And I said, you sure you should do that? And he said, yeah, I know what I'm doing. And I thought to myself, well, who am I to tell him? The captain, the guy that actually was probably the most responsible for the Rangers winning the cup. Who am I to tell him after he's done this 5 times before? So that was our deal. I
got to know what you did, if it's safe for radio, when you had your turn Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, no. It was safe for radio. I took it to a couple of my favorite places in New York where people, I don't think they even understood, is that the real thing? And is that really true? I took it to a couple of favorite places. I didn't take it home to Toronto. I don't know why. I can't remember why I didn't do that and didn't visit all my friends. If I was ever to do it again now, I would make sure that I went to the places that meant a lot to me. But I guess I was letting the players have their day. I will tell you one funny thing. No, it's not funny, but it's the truth. When I had it after Stefan Matteau, John Hughes, was my lawyer. He had played at Cornell many years ago as a captain. His daughter was Sarah Hughes, the figure skater that won the gold medal in the early 2000s.
Sure. She won it here, Neil, in Salt Lake.
Yes, and his wife, Amy, that he married from Cornell, was Jewish at the time, and the children, therefore, were Jewish at birth. And their one son, David, was having his bar mitzvah that day, and I told John, I'll bring it to his bar mitzvah. And so I took the Stanley Cup to David's bar mitzvah, and something that all those kids that were there and families and that will never forget, that the Stanley Cup was there. So that's what I did.
Very cool. Well, Neil, before I set you loose, tell all of our listeners where they can go get your podcast.
Well, they should go get it. It's been a lot of fun. We did it again today with the Stanley Cup date, and this past week, Pat Verbeek, the general manager of the Anaheim Ducks, who acquired Chris Kreider from the aforementioned Rangers last week. We had him on the show, and that was very insightful. It's NHL Wraparound. You can find it on any platform that carries podcasts, from Spotify to Apple Podcasts, iHeart, Amazon. And if you want to see my mug, you can watch us on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel that all our podcasts go on, and you can go to our website, which is NHLWraparound.com, and everything that we've ever done is on there. But along with your show, Spence, this has been a lot of fun season for me, doing the podcast and doing your show, and I look forward to doing it with you in the future.
Certainly. I know it's the off season, but we will be bugging you soon because we have the draft and free agency, and there's a lot of interest in this little old hockey club out here, the Utah Mammoth, Neil. So thank you so much for your time. Have an excellent week.
One personal thing for you,
Spence.
I just found this out yesterday, and that is that I'm speaking at Stanley Jaffe's Celebration of Life on the 28th, and I was informed that there was one other speaker by the name of David W. Checketts that's speaking at it as well.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That will be excellent. So enjoy that. I'm sure you'll kill it, knock it out of the park, and have a great week and safe travels, Neil. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
All right. The great Neil Smith, general manager of the Rangers, the Islanders, high-level scout for the Detroit Red Wings, and joins us on a consistent basis to help us understand the landscape of pro hockey. And the hockey season is now done, and your Florida Panthers are the Stanley Cup champs for the second year in a row. All right, coming up next, we have the figure for what the Lakers sold for. I guessed $8 billion. I was wrong. We'll tell you what the number is. Goodness, the business of basketball is very good. Get back to some offseason Jazz stuff. We're 1 week away from the NBA draft. Do some NBA Finals conversation. We're efforting a couple of NBA guests. We had Timmy Bontemps booked, but it looks like he's going to be busy. We'll let you know. Josh Furlong will stop by later on. We'll do some Utah football and basketball. So plenty to do the rest of the way on a busy Wednesday edition of the program. You are halfway through your work week, one day closer to the weekend on the scorching hot Wednesday afternoon. Don't go anywhere. Keep it right here on ESPN 700. All right, we're hoping to catch up with Tim Bontemps from ESPN. We will catch up with Andy Larson from the Salt Lake Tribune. Andy has been aggregated today, which is something we deal with in this ecosystem where folks online take one portion of something you say and decide to amplify it from their own social channels. So there are several trade rumors going around that random folks on social media have posted, and they've credited Andy with this said trade rumors. But, we'll let Andy kind of explain himself, and he'll join us later. We'll do some Jazz draft. We'll do some NBA draft. We'll do some off-season. So stay tuned for that. Porter, you are, among other things, a financial expert, correct?
I don't know if I can claim that one.
So generally speaking, what's a healthy ROI on one's investment?
A return on investment. Let me say, I don't know, 20%?
Wow.
More? I like a good 20%.
Okay, 20% is phenomenal.
There we go.
A healthy ROI is more like 7 or 8%.
Yeah.
As they say with the market. How's 150 times your original investment?
Yeah.
That's strong to quite strong?
I'm not a financial advisor, just to be clear.
Not officially, but you dabble.
But if you can get your hands on an NBA team in any time prior to the 2010s, yeah, buy it. Buy it and sit on it for as long as you can, almost like real estate. It's going to go up and up and up and up.
So Dr. Jerry Buss, and if you watch the documentary series on HBO, Winning Time, first of all, it was awesome. I was so bummed they canceled it. It was a book. It was based off a book written by, oh, man. I'll get it. Jeff something. Jeff something wrote that book. Shout out to Jeff something. Do you remember who wrote the book that Winning Time was based upon? It might not even be Jeff.
Pearlman.
Jeff Pearlman. Shout out to Jeff Pearlman, who wrote a great book on the Buss family and the early Laker years, and obviously everything from Wilt to Kareem to Magic. I mean, it really is, and I know we're in Salt Lake City and everybody hates the Lakers, and I get it, and I'm no Laker fan. But it's pretty phenomenal when you understand exactly the depth and breadth of that story and how to this very day they just have been able to bridge gaps with stars. And whether that's fair or unfair, it's probably not fair. It's the reality. Professional basketball players. I mean, look, if you listen to the discourse surrounding the Memphis Grizzlies after they elected to move on from Desmond Bane, a lot of NBA players have taken to their platforms or have gone on other platforms to talk about how nobody wants to live in Memphis. And that's become like a hot button topic, over the past 24, 48 hours in pro basketball. And the fact of the matter is, if you polled NBA players, if you polled all of them and said, where do you want to live? I don't know, 80, 90% of them would probably say Los Angeles. So it's an innate advantage that the Lakers have always had. I don't know why the Clippers haven't been able to turn it into anything very special, but as our guy Zach Harper likes to say, Clippers going to clip. So, that is an innate advantage, of course, that a team located in a city where every NBA player wants to live, and we can go all the way back, George Mikan, I already referenced Wilt, there's Jerry West, there's Elgin Baylor. They've had so many stars that I'm going to leave some out, but they bridge that gap to Kareem, Magic, Worthy, then it's Shaq and Kobe. Pau Gasol stops by, wins a championship with them. Move over into now what's the LeBron phase, and obviously Luka Doncic at the age of 25 will carry them into the future. And if you watch Winning Time, first of all, phenomenal. And a lot of interesting insight on Dr. Buss, who was a bit of a P.T. Barnum type charlatan. He was kind of a showman. Didn't have near the amount of cash he needed. Played brilliantly, by the way, by John C. Reilly. I mean, knocked it out of the park during that series. Leveraged every piece of whatever he had to get loans to buy the LA Lakers for $67.5 million. Today, the LA Lakers sold for $10 billion. It's the largest U.S. sale of any pro sports team by a long shot. I mean, the Lakers I don't remember what the Commanders went for. I want to say it was $6 or $7 billion. The Lakers just went for $3 or $4 billion more than an NFL team, which is something I never thought I'd say. Something I never thought I'd see. The Buss family just made 150 times their original investment. And you do have to wonder what the Luka Doncic trade did for this transaction. Now, the gentleman who is buying the LA Lakers is a guy by the name of Mark Walter, who's the CEO and chairman of a diversified holding company, TWG Global. Probably did a grip of illegal things to make his money, untoward investments on the financial markets and such. Mark tried to buy the Clippers and lost in the bidding war to Steve Ballmer. And I remember at the time when Steve Ballmer bought the Clippers for $2 billion, people were floored. Fast forward, 6-7 years later, $10 billion for the Los Angeles Lakers. So good to be Jeannie Buss. Magic Johnson has chimed in on Twitter, which is always awesome. Have I talked to you about the Magic Johnson Twitter? I swear every time Magic tweets, I'm like, who is the 8-year-old kid that's behind this Twitter account? Or
just like someone completely trolling with like the most Captain Obvious takes, right? It feels like Magic is trying to like let you inside the front office, let you inside the know, but it's like the most obvious, nonsensical, it just completely exactly what you'd expect from someone who has no connection to the organization or anything. It's quite entertaining.
It is hilarious. I mean, during finals games, Magic will tweet things out like the Pacers outscored the Thunder 17-4 over the past 2 minutes. Thanks, Magic.
They will win the game if they score more points. Yeah.
So
got it.
Magic has chimed in. Ultimately, I guess he knows Mark a little bit. But a landscape day, like a very, very interesting day, and only about 8-9 months after the transaction that saw the Boston Celtics sold for $6.1 billion. And when they were sold for $6.1 billion, people raised their eyes at that point as well. So over the past about year and a half, the following franchises have been sold in pro basketball. The Timberwolves were sold to Alex Rodriguez and his group for $1.5 billion. The Phoenix Suns were sold to Matt Ishbia for $4 billion. The Boston Celtics were sold for $6.1 billion. And today the Los Angeles Lakers were sold for $10 billion. Now, Minneapolis essentially is a bigger metropolitan area and a bigger media market than Salt Lake City. Ryan, I believe, was it I think it was $800 million. He bought the Jazz for $800 million. Maybe it was a little bit more than that when the dust settled. But it really underscores what I've talked about now for a little while. And I don't think it's good news for people that like basketball. I don't think it's good news for people that enjoy basketball when it's played at the highest of levels, when the best athletes in the world care about showing up for work and playing hard and playing intensely. We get what we've been able to see since March. Now, one of the reasons we always do this dumb sports talk radio debate, hey, what do you like more, the fall or the spring? It's like an old cliche, and, we're entering the summer sports talk radio landscape where dumb debates like that kind of dominate the landscape. Most people lean into the fall, and the reason's obvious. Football, right? College and pro. And I'm not saying you're wrong if that's your take, because, of course, certainly when you live in a climate where it's 90, 95 degrees for a number of weeks and months, love the warmth. I'm not complaining about it. Bring the sun. But, those first few fall crisp days, the first college football Saturday of the year. Now, oftentimes the first college football Saturday around here, certainly if you sit on the east side of Rice Eccles Stadium, you better bring your sunglasses, you better bring your sunscreen. But that first day you wake up and it's like 58 degrees, 7 o'clock in the morning, ends up being, 70, 72, kick, go to the tailgate, meet your buddies, hang out, have a good time, go to the game, watch college football for the first time. Those are magical days, and it's hard to debate if you're really into just simply the fall season of sports. And by ratings and interest and ears and eyes, you very much are. The landscape of media changes for everybody in the fall, for the better, by the way. Of course, as the home of the Utes, we'll look forward to Utah football. Porter, what's the countdown? Because I love the countdown. Give me the countdown today.
73 days, good sir.
Okay.
73 days, 2 hours, 10 minutes, and 51 seconds.
Now it's 50. But thank you for being very specific. So if your whole take is if I ask you spring or fall, and you bring the fall to me. I'm not complete, because the other thing comes back in the fall is NBA basketball. But the issue with NBA basketball coming back in the fall, at least over this new generation of player empowerment and load management and guys literally not even showing up for work, is that if we're real about the NBA right now, the interest is down during the regular season. The ratings are down during the regular season. Ticket rip, everything. Revenue down during the regular season outside of TV rights. And that's why the Lakers are able to get $10 billion, because the NBA is about to enter a landscape of a new TV deal that will pay them $72 billion that is split amongst the teams throughout the course of the entire league. That's why, you know, if you're the owner of a fledgling basketball team that can't figure out this clunky rebuild and you're being criticized because ever since you took over, the decision-making has been inconsistent at best, you can email me your P&L statement and a middle finger, and I'm like, yeah, you're right. We know the deal. Porter, remind our listeners.
Profited loss.
There you go. That a boy. See, you are a financial advisor. You lied to me.
I do dabble a little bit.
I know you dabble. But
you want to know where my portfolio is this year?
Is it strong to quite strong?
Plus 9%.
Plus 9%. That means you're doing well. Anything above 8 is amazing.
Thank you.
But Porter, once again, as we often do, I would like you to remind our listeners of the golden rule that we follow here on The Drive.
The man with the gold makes them rules.
That's our golden rule. Now, treat other people well. You know, the whole thing. Do unto others. It's been a minute, but that's kind of the gist of it. So ultimately, this underscores what I perceive to be a problem if you like basketball. If you like basketball the way it's been played since March. Back to my little diatribe here. So fall for most people is what moves the needle when it comes to your favorite time on the sport calendar. But the reason I've always brought up spring as really one of the things that I love the most when it comes to this job and when it comes to the biorhythms of sport in general is spring is when basketball finally becomes great. Spring is when basketball finally becomes what once upon a time it was all year long. Once upon a time, playing 82 games mattered. And yes, I sound like the old dude. I acknowledge that. That's fine. Once upon a time, contract incentives were written into games played. And I'm not talking about, hey, get 50, 55 in this year. No. You play 82 games, you get a check. You play more than 75 games, you get a check. And there are incentives written into contracts now, but it's not the way it used to be. And then there was simply the player pride, which is, I have a job to do, and I'm paid handsomely to play a child's game, so I will show up to do that because the fans deserve it. That attitude went out the window about a decade ago. And the reason it went out the window about a decade ago is the money became so stupid. I mean, so stupid. Generational wealth built in a month if you're a high-level NBA basketball player. That the motivation to show up to play in order to get paid flew out the window. And look, the bottom line also is this. The players deserve their share of the basketball-related income because we watch the games to watch the players. We don't watch the game to watch Will Hardy prance up and down the sideline. We don't watch the game to watch Austin Ainge make a draft pick. We don't watch a game for any other reason than to watch the best athletes in the world play this honestly very fascinating, intricately involved game. It's so much more than meets the eye. Like the adjustments these two coaches are making during the NBA Finals, going back and forth, have been intoxicating when you dig into it. And that's why I actually talk about basketball on the show, right? Like you tune in to a lot of quote-unquote basketball shows, and what are they talking about? The drama, the relationships, the players getting arrested, the players getting in trouble, the drama surrounding, and look, drama drives interest. And, of course, when it comes to trade rumors in pro basketball, because the Jazz are smack dab in the middle of most of them, we talk about them on the show. But when it comes to basketball starting in March, we dig into the NCAA tournament. We tell you what to watch for with these teams. Basketball playoffs, we break down matchups, we break down adjustments. We talk basketball on the show. But it's hard to talk basketball on the show during the course of the majority of the regular season. So they try things with the in-season cup. And then occasionally we'll get a matchup where it feels like it means something. But oftentimes you tune into a matchup in, November or December or whatever it is. And even if it's a matchup that's on national television, even if it's a matchup of, say, like OKC and Boston. I remember when those two teams played this year for the first time and everybody was juiced. And the first matchup between those two teams, you turned it on. You're like, am I watching two teams at a YMCA march up and down and just shoot threes? Do these guys really even care? Are they really even trying? And as we've talked about, oftentimes coaches and players in pro basketball, they say the quiet part out loud. 2 years ago when the Dallas Mavericks lost in the NBA playoffs, Jason Kidd took the mic during the postgame and said, you guys don't get it. We are simply millionaires cheering for each other. And you just went, dude, what? Don't say things like that out loud. Yes, we know, Jason, we watch. And oftentimes it looks like you guys are going through the motions. And so now we know the deal. Now we know that you're just simply rich dudes cheering for other rich dudes, and the competition, more often than not, during the course of much of the regular season, leaves a lot to be desired. But not now, not during this time. And when you look at the LA Lakers being sold for $10 billion, and when you go over, we were talking about this during Crosstalk, the highest paid hockey player in the NHL makes $14 million. That is Jordan Clarkson money, okay? Like, it's a different ecosystem. It's a different stratosphere. And when the money became so stupid that these guys with their guaranteed contracts simply have the direct deposit spill in every 2 weeks, not to mention the off-court potential to make in sneaker deals and endorsements, that's when the product started to suffer. Money changes everything. It just does. That's why we talk about the golden rule on the program. And today, well, it's great news for the Buss family, underscores what I perceive to be a massive issue that isn't changing. Like, obviously, the NBA is not going to be like, hey, we should try to not make money. And I'm not saying, like, I'm a grown-up. I'm an adult. I understand that this is a front-facing entertainment business that is designed to make a profit for its shareholders, because I understand how America works. So I get it. I understand it. But ultimately, if you're a fan of basketball, there are way too many stretches throughout the course of the regular season where you might as well watch paint dry. All right, we'll bring in Andy Larson coming up next. We'll talk some Jazz basketball. We'll get his thoughts on the LA Lakers being sold for $10 billion. But let's welcome in my friend Kathy Bybee from Pure Life Medical on a Wednesday afternoon. Kathy, how are you?
Great. I'm doing great.
Appreciate the time. So Pure Life Medical provides many services for people, but a big thing you guys do is stem cell therapy. How does that work?
Well, it's simply the best thing since the internet. Imagine how that changed our lives.
Wow.
Exactly. It's the new medicine that we all need to know about. So I've been excited. I came out of retirement for this, to be able to provide this to our clients and have these options available to heal our bodies. It's like having a hand-picked dream team of cells, and they go in and they find the source of the problem, and they signal your body to do all of that tissue repair and fix it from the inside out, seeks inflammation. It's a game changer. So a lot of people that we see, they're in chronic pain, or they may have limited mobility, bad joints, aches, pains, or long COVID, those kind of things. They're coming in for the stem cells that will help them in a way that they've not been able to get help traditionally from medication or surgery. So it's a great option. It fixes the problem. It doesn't mask the problem, and it does it naturally. So, wow. At Pure Life, we've been able to see some of the clients that we've been able to see can't drive, their feet are so bad, or their kidney function is about ready to put them on dialysis, or their heart is in levels of failure. And through some of those IV treatments, we've been able to increase those functions, get them back on the road driving, or get them back playing with their teams when it's a joint that's involved, or dancing with their grandchildren. Who doesn't want to do that? So it's been a great option. And so fun to see the results. It's life-changing for them and for me. If I listen to somebody talk about the stories that I get to see every day, I would think they're lying. And it's the real truth that we have right here for us, available in our time.
So how do you know if you need it? How do you know if you could benefit from stem cell therapy?
We got ache and pain that would work, if it's a shoulder, a back, or a hip, any of those problems. Those are red flags. But in general, there are other ways too. If you've got systemic problems that aren't being treated with traditional medicine efficiently for you, you would want to see if maybe that would be a possibility for a stem cell. A lot of people are also using stem cell for longevity. And after a while, our bodies kind of need a tune-up, and that is a possibility with stem cells as well. So it does help us enjoy an active lifestyle into later years. So that is a great game changer as well. And then some people are simply avoiding surgery. We're just seeing people cancel their surgeries after they've been able to have a stem cell therapy that removes that joint pain, helps them regrow tendons and ligaments. Things that we didn't know were possible before are possible now. So it's been a great thing. It gives renewed hope. And that's probably the most exciting thing. I get to hear people say, I haven't been able to even hope, and I have hope now that I'm going to be able to live a productive life and have the joy back that I thought was gone for everybody. We have a lot of experience in our field. So when you come to a Pure Life clinic, you're going to get experienced providers that are going to be able to treat you like they've treated thousands of other patients, and that kind of takes the guesswork out of it. You can be comfortable with that level of expertise, but it will be tailored to you individually, and that's also a rewarding experience to know that you'll be listened to and taken seriously. So sometimes stem cells aren't the perfect prop. That we've turned people away. We don't think that it's a good fit for them, but we have other things that we can do. So we use a lot of peptides as well. Those are also cutting edge, and a lot of those will help you rebuild your own tissues as well, or help with inflammation. And acoustic wave is a great thing to combine with stem cells. So is red light, so is hyperbaric oxygen. And so we combine all of those things either with or without stem cells, but we want to make sure that we get you back to your good old self and being able to run the race that you want.
Kathy, before I set you loose, how can people go about getting a consultation with you at Pure Life Medical?
Yeah, that would be a good thing. Its consultations are free, so you're not out anything. Give us a call. It's 385-342-2598. Again, that's 385-342-2598. And there's more information at cottonwood.com. And I'm sorry, purelifecottonwood.com. And the pure has no E on it, PUR, lifecottonwood.com. So we hope to hear from you. This is a new era of medicine. Fun to be part of it.
Kathy, thank you for your time. Have a great week, and we'll chat soon.
All right, thanks. Thank you.
All right, Kathy Bybee, Pure Life Medical. Give them a call at 385-342-2598. That's 385-342-2598. 385-342-2598, or online at purelifecottonwood.com. All right, we've got 2 hours in the books. We've got 2 hours to go. Andy Larson joins us coming up on the other side of a Wednesday edition of The Drive right here on ESPN 700, 92.1 FM. We are proud to be part of Utah's ESPN radio network. Going to bring in Josh Furlong in a little bit. He covers the University of Utah athletic program for our friends at KSL. NBA Finals Game 6 tomorrow in Indianapolis. The LA Lakers have been sold for a cool $10 billion, but Porter is in his bag today because as much as I stay away from social media prior to the show, I'll check it. And our next guest has been aggregated, as we deal with in this business quite a bit, as every fifth tweet was a Jazz trade rumor attributed to the great Andy Larson from the Salt Lake Tribune. Andy, why are you all over my timeline today?
You know, you say some things. I was on the Locked On Jazz podcast yesterday, or I guess it got released today, and then one Twitter user, tweets what I said but says it in kind of the Andy Larson is reporting X way, and then the fans of the teams involved get involved, and the Lakers, Sixers, and Mavs have pretty big fan bases, and anyway, yeah, you just kind of blow up, and then you get on NBA Central, you get the likes of Everett and Cidery and Legion Hoops and all those different weird aggregation accounts come together, and then it's hearing from fans. I mean, it's probably 20 notifications a minute right now on my phone. It is crazy.
Okay, well, fair enough. I was a little bit confused. I was glad we could get you today, though, to talk about this. So let's just kind of go down the list, and I'll give you the space to kind of unpack some of this stuff. And let's start with, and it's interesting. I don't know if you've heard this, even though I do know that you listen to this show for 4 hours every day and never miss a minute. About a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months ago, I don't know if he was reporting. Well, actually, let me clean that up. I know that he was not reporting this, but Tim McMahon said he has heard that Colin Sexton could be an option for the Mavs to look at while Kyrie gets healthy. So let's start with that potential that you talked about and we're aggregated about, Colin Sexton to the Dallas Mavericks. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's something that I've heard from kind of both sides of the table there, that it is kind of a reasonable landing spot for Colin Sexton because, right, like he's an expiring contract, he's a very good player, and because Kyrie Irving is going to miss the majority, if not the totality of the next season with the major injury he suffered last year, right? Like, so I think it just does make sense as the Dallas Mavericks try to stay, semi-competitive. I don't think they're trying to tank out next year to that Colin Sexton would make some sense. Their salary picture is interesting in that the matching salaries in a deal, it's hard to find which players would make sense from the Jazz to take on. So the Jazz could take on Caleb Martin, but I don't know that makes a ton of sense from a Utah point of view, given that he has 3 years on the deal, and then even that's still not enough. You need to find one other contract to make that work. So I think it's a possibility. I think maybe more likely in kind of a 3-team scenario or but I do think the fit makes sense, and it's something that's seen as a fit in multiple conversations I've had.
All right, this is also a situation that isn't necessarily new, and Dave McMenamin on this show has talked about how the Lakers, well, everybody knows the Lakers need a big, okay? If you watch basketball, you understand the Lakers badly need a big. And even last year, prior to the trade deadline, there were some rumors about the Jazz and the Lakers discussing the framework of a deal that would land Walker Kessler in Los Angeles. So let's move over to that one. What's your understanding of those conversations, if they're taking place, and if this is a possibility?
Yeah, those conversations are real. And I mean, the Lakers have seen Walker Kessler as a very good fit for them at center for a long time. And it's just kind of hey, what are you going to give, right? Do you have the assets that make sense with the Jazz's rebuilding timeline, given how much the Jazz reasonably like Walker Kessler, right? I think they like Walker Kessler quite a bit. But, to this point, they've even, the picks they would trade, let's be honest, are probably now with the Luka Doncic trade and everything else, probably going to be at the bottom of the first round. And so, are you willing to move on from your most interesting young piece for a couple of picks at the bottom of the first round? I don't know that the Jazz are. And in fact, I suspect if they were willing to do that, they would have made the deal at some point already. Is Dalton Knecht in that deal, I think, is relevant. Is Rui Hachimura in that deal is relevant. I don't know specifically what the actual offer is, but I do know that there have been multiple conversations about that, or multiple, I guess, The Lakers have reached out to the Jazz multiple times thinking that Walker Kessler is that guy for them. I just don't know that the Jazz, if they have compiled, I mean, obviously they have not yet compiled an offer that the Jazz have said yes to, and I don't know that they have been particularly close in tempting the Jazz in actually making that deal. I do tend to think, like, if the Jazz were to actually shop Walker Kessler around the league, they could probably get better picks back and maybe better young players back than they could than from the Lakers.
All right, let's move over to the potential of a deal on, well, doesn't have to be on draft night, but regarding the draft where Philly at 3 is thought to potentially be willing to maybe move down. I don't really know much about how that would take place, but this is another one that was out there. Andy, shed some light on this one.
Look, they know they need to retool their roster, and there are a bunch of different ways to do that. I think there is a tank path where you give up on Joel Embiid entirely, but the Paul George contract is a part of this, and is in my view, and I think a lot of league-wide observers view, a negative contract, given that he just turned 35 and put up a 14 PER last season, and had a whole bunch of other bad Sixer stuff go on around him, but did not look very good last year. And this is decline time in players' contracts, right? In players' careers. So I get why, the Sixers would be interested in dumping the Paul George contract. I will say also that if they wanted to do kind of that 3 for 5 and Paul George swap, that would mean that the Jazz have to send back matching salaries, right? And given the size of that contract, around $50 million a year, you would have to send probably both of John Collins and Colin Sexton or Lauri Markkanen in order to make that deal work. And it's hard to see how that makes sense for the Jazz. Maybe all of a sudden if Jazz don't have to give up the number 5 pick and can have 2 top 5 picks, then maybe it makes sense. But then I don't know that the Sixers do that deal. So I from my understanding, it's not something, again, it's an offer that's been kind of out there, or conversations have been had, and I don't know the current status of those, but I never got the sense that it was like, a piece or two away. These are big frameworks that I think there is significant disagreement on.
Honestly, lost track of all the aggregation, and I did not listen to the pod respectfully, but I do believe there was a John Collins situation, maybe with the Lakers, maybe with the Warriors. Does that ring a bell?
I was referring more to the past on that one. I'm going to be honest. And that's one of the dangers of aggregation is like, hey, when you're talking about conversations that may have happened around the trade deadline or even earlier, I talked about that on the podcast, and I did not mean to say with John Collins specifically that, like, those have happened more recently.
Okay, fair enough. But let me expand the question. Look, if they could trade him, they would. They would trade him tomorrow. And now that contract is expiring, do you think it's more likely they'll find a suitor?
Yeah, I do. And I think, John Collins had a really good year last year. And I think that he does fit into a lot of what teams want in terms of, if you have a heliocentric star or, your ball handling situation figured out, I think he provides really interesting spacing, really interesting rebounding. And then I think was better on the defensive end, probably not a plus on defense last year, but was better than he was 2 years ago. So I do think it makes sense as a fit on court wise. I think, as always, the tough part is finding a team that can take on a $25 million salary, give up a $25 million salary in return, and have that make sense for the Jazz moving forward rather than just letting John Collins expire. Right. And I think that's easier said than done. I think so. The Warriors are an example, and actually I said this on the podcast, like they may have had some interest at the trade deadline to go get John Collins. They got Jimmy Butler instead, and all of a sudden the trade math doesn't make sense at all, right? Like it's just hard to figure out how the contracts would work there. So, I think it is, I don't think that there's no interest in the league with John Collins, and I think, again, he's a good player. I don't know the status of kind of how those conversations have gone in the last few weeks even. I was just referring to stuff that had happened months ago.
All right, fair enough. Let's move over here, Andy. I think that's all the aggregation that was across my timeline. But, Brian Windhorst, I don't know, a few days ago on SportsCenter dropped the whole, like, he's been told the Jazz are going to try to accelerate the rebuild. That's not what he said. I'm paraphrasing, but you understand the spirit of the whole thing. And then ever since that conversation took place, I've had NBA guests on the show. Haberstroh rolled by. We had Smitty in studio. And we've just debated what I perceive to be two different paths for the Jazz. And Brian Windhorst is a very smart, plugged-in, very good NBA reporter who certainly deserves respect. So I'm not saying that he's lying. I don't know what that avenue looks like. Like Boston apparently is willing to trade everybody outside of Tatum, who's going to be hurt all of next year. And if you add Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis to this roster for free, I mean, play-in, 45 win. Like, I don't know what that looks like. But again, Windhorst is a respectable guy who deserves respect. So there's that path that includes adding to the group a veteran or two that can expedite the growth, add to winning right away. And then the other avenue, and Tommy brought this up, and you've talked about it before, and you and I have discussed it, and this is not reporting anything. This is discussing and pontificating on possibilities where you engage with San Antonio at 2, and you say something like, all right, Markkanen in 5 for Harrison Barnes and Keldon Johnson at 2. And obviously, Harrison Barnes is not in your future plans. Keldon might be. He's 25. He's fine. And then at 2, you grab Dylan Harper. Then you can continue this long game, slow play, brick by brick by brick. That makes more sense to me because you and I have discussed and will continue to discuss all year that 8th pick, the top 8 protected pick that will go to OKC if you're not in the top 8. So those are the two avenues, Andy. What do you think happens?
Yeah, look, I think you laid it out well. I don't know whether Brian Windhorst, was referencing Austin Ainge's comments that the Jazz didn't want to tank next year as like the sole basis of that, or also something that he was hearing around the league. I think I completely agree with you. Windhorst is like an awesome NBA reporter and knows much more than I do in many, many cases. But also he got aggregated on that a little bit, right? And I know what that's like. I think it could be either way. And Windhorst obviously then gets the extra bonus points in Utah for the what's going on in Utah meme, right? Like where he did, essentially predict that there were going to be bigger moves after the Royce O'Neal trade that ended up meaning Donovan and Rudy and Quinn all left Utah. I could see it going either way. And I do think, there is some interest in the idea of not being bad anymore, and the idea of, hey, yeah, let's go get the Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis and start building a team that's trying to win. And then maybe through that, you make the young guys better too, right? There's also a thought, frankly, that like even if you have Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis, it's not immediately clear that that's a top 11 team in the West, right? That could still be a bottom 4 team in the West, which would theoretically allow you to keep a top 8 pick next year, right? And so, and then you're kind of trying to thread the needle that way and build without worrying about that too much. I think ultimately, like in the end, what Austin Ainge said at the press conference, I think is interesting. It's just like, hey, you're just trying to make one good deal after another. You're trying to make one good decision after another. And I know that's boring and you should have kind of a plan, but that's also been kind of the Danny Ainge and Justin Zanuck point of view too, is like, hey, when they have traded guys, it has been for positive value. In general, the league has thought they've done well with their business, with maybe one or two exceptions. And so I don't think that they will all of a sudden issue that in order to kind of chase one plan or another if the value they're getting in these deals doesn't make sense.
All right, fair enough. We are 1 week away from the NBA draft. And before we get into maybe individual prospects and the noise around Ace Bailey and such, just what are you hearing about the potential for activity? Or are you hearing that it's more likely that the Jazz stay at 5-21? What are you hearing as of now?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're interested in moving in all kind of different possibilities there. Kind of the vibe, I believe it was Vesney who reported this last week, that like it's kind of quiet in the trade market right now is true. I think like essentially you would expect more maybe conversation a week out, but there are still obvious kind of deals that make sense for a lot of different teams. There are a lot of people waiting to see what happens with Giannis and Kevin Durant. I will say that. As far as like specific things that the Jazz do, kind of like the context of the Philadelphia thing we mentioned earlier, like that was my answer to that question yesterday, right? Like, I have heard that possibility. I don't know of any kind of other specific possibilities of the Jazz kind of moving up and down or around with the number 5 and number 21 picks.
Vesini and Gavoni and some others too are reporting that there is some real noise around the league regarding Ace Bailey, who once upon a time was thought to be a top 3 and maybe even flirting with a top 2 prospect. Now it feels like consensus that it's Cooper 1 and Dillon 2. But for a long time, any mock I saw had Ace at 3. And then you started to hear some things. Of course, there was the combine measurement that people latched onto. It's like, wow, could he fall to 5 to the Jazz? And now you're seeing things like, is he still going to stay in the top 10? I don't have any frame of reference for it. What's your understanding about what NBA teams could potentially be concerned about concerning Ace Bailey?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've heard just much more negative stuff than I have positive stuff. I do think, some team in the top 10, I think, just bites the apple. Like there is significant talent there, but it's much more interesting at like 6'10" than it is at 6'7", which is where he ended up measuring out. And, so you worry about the tough shots that he made in college. Do they continue to go in against longer defenders in the NBA? Then you worry about kind of you worry about the development path, like he's been pretty clear in interviews, like he sees his path as getting stronger, which then he can use to bump guys off his body and create more space in the mid-range for more mid-range shots. And, a lot of teams don't want to go that direction. I think there's some concern about like, hey, is this guy going to be part of a 5-man offense or just try to get as many points as he can? And then, I think there's some on and off defensive effort questions where we see 2 teams in the NBA Finals that are absolutely killing themselves on every defensive possession, right? Like, so kind of the kind of mid-range comp, I think, for Ace Bailey has been Michael Porter Jr. for a long time. But if you're going shorter Michael Porter Jr., how much value does that really have? And do you really want to draft that guy over, I think, some other compelling prospects in the top 6 or 7? I think that's a reasonable question to ask. And then, I've done some draft modeling on my own and looked at other draft models as well. Like, in general, Ace does not project as necessarily like in that same class as Cooper and Dillon because because of some of those issues and because Rutgers did struggle and they struggled even more when he was off the floor, to be fair, but like it's not the typical profile of a top prospect. So yeah, I get the concerns. And for me, it's at the point where if I'm trying to create a franchise, not just get the most talent available, I am looking at Trey Johnson or VJ Edgecombe or Con Knippel, right? Like, and really thinking about who is going to help me win a championship, who is likely to actually push me to the next round in the playoffs. It might be those other guys more. And so, again, I think at some point, whether it's at Washington at number 6 or Brooklyn or, I think he is drafted in the top 10. I am not that worried about him falling out of the top 10, but I do understand the teams that have real concerns and want to go in another direction with prospects I think are also incredibly talented.
As I ask you every week, and this will be the final time. Well, no, we actually might get you on draft day. And for our listeners, Andy is doing the show on Friday of next week after the 2 rounds of the draft. So that'll be some good stuff. To stay tuned for that. So I'll probably ask you one more time. But for this week, the Andy Larson take on the most realistic, best possible scenario at 5 for the Jazz is who and why?
I think best possible scenario is VJ Edgecombe falls. And I like VJ Edgecombe as a prospect a lot. I've been doing some draft modeling over the last couple of weeks, and the model considers VJ Edgecombe to be a top-tier prospect at a higher level than kind of the other guys in that range. So that's because of the blocks, that's because of the steals, that's because of the athleticism measurements, that's because of the kind of semi-efficiency and kind of small usage kind of projects well. He's got a good assist-to-turnover rate. And in general, when I talked to VJ at the Combine, was a kid with his head screwed on straight. Kind of reminded me of Donovan Mitchell in his draft workouts where he was like, look, I think I can impact the floor on the defensive end first and then expand my game to be offensive. And, that's not what ended up happening with Donovan Mitchell, but kind of having the right mentality about the game and about his own development and about his own work ethic really impressed me. Then it really impressed me about VJ Edgecombe. I don't think it's realistic that he falls to number 5. So in that case, I'm waffling still between Trey Johnson and Con Knipple. And I think Trey Johnson is more likely from a Jazz point of view. I may go the other direction with Con Knipple just because I like the defense so much more. And I think it's well past time for the Jazz to start drafting defensively as well as offensively. But right now, I don't know which of those 2 players the Jazz would pick.
Final thing, Andy, was Johnny Russell the missing piece all along?
No, played a good first half and scored a goal, and that's great. I think that he could only play 45 minutes with something, but that's a bad DC team that, lost 7-1 to the Fire the week before. The 2-0 win was good, and, it was fun cheering on RSL to a win at home. I do not think entirely differently about RSL now than I did maybe before that game happened.
Fair enough, bud. Thanks for the time. Thanks for hopping on. We'll chat soon, okay?
Yep, no worries. Thanks, man.
Andy Larson covers the Jazz for the Salt Lake Tribune. We're going to switch gears and talk some Utah football and basketball coming up with Josh Furlong. But before we catch a break, we welcome in our friend Ryan from the Dish Professionals. You guys know the number. It's 801-424-DISH. Just call that and save money. Bottom line. What's going on, Ryan?
Yeah, just call us up, take advantage of our deals. And, guys, we have a very good offer right now at Dish. Not only do we still have the 2-year promotion, which you get huge credits for the next 2 years, they guarantee the price isn't going to change. You get the award-winning Hopper, which is the biggest DVR out there, 2 terabytes, 16 tuners. With the Hopper Plus technology, you can have all the streaming apps built in, so it's all pretty seamless. It's the best thing to describe it as. So you have one remote, you just can flip through traditional TV or streaming, whatever you're looking for. Like Netflix and YouTube and Amazon Video Prime are literally like a channel. Call us up, make the switch, get upgraded. I'll get you 3 months of service for free. If you go with the higher package, you get literally almost $400 worth of credits on that. It's a fantastic promotion there. This is a limited time, so pick up the phone and call us. I'll set you up with dinner at JCW's on top of that. And don't forget, we can help with internet. I have a half a dozen different internet providers right now, starting at $20 a month on up. So listen, if you've got crappy internet, it's glitchy, it's not working, you got the kids complaining, pick up the phone and call us. We can help you with that and lower your bill and save you money all the way around. 424-DISH. Call us now, 801-424-3474.
There he is, Ryan from the Dish Pros. Shout out to our good friends at Utah Elite Services. With summer on the way, it's the perfect time to be introducing our newest partner of the ESPN Sports Network, Utah Elite Services, a Utah-grown asphalt maintenance and concrete repair company. We've seen rain, snow, wind, and now we see the heat. Your concrete has been through a lot. If you see any cracks or extreme damage that need to be fixed, give Utah Elite Services a call. Corey's team can take care of crack sealing, coating, stripping, asphalt, overlays, complete tear-outs, and replacements of your concrete. Don't let the concrete outside of your home, condo, or even business be a sore thumb. Get it fixed with Utah Elite Services. Give Utah Elite Services a call for a no-cost, no-obligation estimate at 801-821-8670. That's 801-821-8670. All right, coming up on the other side, we will switch gears. We'll talk some Utah athletics, football, basketball, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Josh Furlong stops by. Then we'll get to the 5 o'clock hour of the program on a busy Wednesday afternoon edition of The Drive. So keep it right here on ESPN 700. We'll get to the 5 o'clock hour of the program coming up in a bit. Breaking news out of the world of professional basketball. Dr. Jerry Buss bought the Lakers for $67.5 million. And today, those same Los Angeles Lakers were sold for $10 billion, 150 times your original investment. So there you go. Of course, NBA playoffs roll along. Finals get going back tomorrow. So we'll get to that in a bit, but let's talk some Utes with our buddy Josh Furlong from KSL on a Wednesday. What's going on, Josh?
It's going well. How about you, man?
Good, man. Appreciate the time as always. So let's start with some news that I think will make Coach Witt happy, I think, or at least take this off of his plate. According to Ross Dellinger, the CFP will begin player availability/injury reports starting next season. So that's going to be a reality now. And to Kyle's credit, I always say, look, he's always said that if they make me do it, I will. Well, now he has no choice. What are your thoughts?
Well, this will just be for the college football playoffs, and so this won't necessarily be for Big 12 play. The conference would have to set that one. I would assume that that's where everything moves forward. So I think that that's going to be the case. And he's always said, look, if it's a conference-wide thing or a college football league-wide thing, he's in favor of it. I think he just thinks that there's a competitive advantage if you kind of hold back any information that you can get. And let's be real, like, he's not the only one. Any college football coach is pretty paranoid about giving any information out to others. So it's understandable. But as we saw last year, it's a little bit difficult with something like Cam Rising, where we didn't get a lot of information and we didn't have a lot of updates. So I think it's a welcome change for everybody if this does fully go about. There's no more hiding a lot of these things. And I think especially in the age of whether it be betting or just in general of this becoming more of a professionalized type sport, there needs to be something like that to be able to create a standard practice to be able to understand who's going to be on the field that day.
Yeah, I would imagine, and I didn't do a great job of unpacking that question, that this is the first domino to fall, because I don't think it makes any sense to continue the status quo. I actually do think it's an unfair scenario when it comes to the players, because as you and I have discussed, and I've discussed with some other guests to talk college football and Utes specifically, I don't think I really understood the toll that the public backlash was taking on Cameron until he came in studio with Bill and kind of outlined it, then sat down with Chris Camerati from The Athletic and was very forthcoming and honest about how hard it's been. So I understand the angle that Kyle talks about. There are several coaches, namely Lincoln Riley, and let's see. I've also heard, plenty of other coaches talk about how they do not believe. Lane Kiffin was the other one who's actually very adamant and almost dismissive of coaches who believe it gives them a competitive advantage. So there's two sides to the equation, Josh. But we can let the adults argue the collateral damage seems to fall on the shoulders of the kids. Is that fair?
Yeah, 100%. We saw that last year where, quite honestly, Cam Rising plays that Arizona State game simply because of the pressure that was getting to him, right? There was a lot of people that were coming and kind of saying that he was just taking the money and hiding, essentially, because it was just like a small injury. When in reality, now we know that there's multiple injuries that took place. Obviously, his knee repair and everything, and then you have the nerve damage with his hand. This wasn't just something that he could do. And so I think it didn't fall on Kyle, right? Like nobody was looking at him to say, oh, you're hiding. I mean, there was some fallback to him, but at the end of the day, Cam's the one that had to face the public opinion, so to speak, and kind of defend it. And unfortunately, the last time we're ever going to see Cam Rising was in that awful Arizona State game where it was obvious to everybody that he just wasn't right. So, that's probably the best use case in this instance where it doesn't help situations. It doesn't help the players. Yes, this is more turning into professionalized systems in the sense that they get paid and, they can make their own quote unquote business decisions. But at the end of the day, there's not a lot of protections for a lot of these players. And so something like this, even though it seems simple, is kind of the first step to a protection to the players, to the coaching staff, to the organization in general, to be able to make this more standardized and make it even for everybody so that there's not a lot of inconsistencies out there.
So kind of a dead period in the world of college football right now when it comes to, things that are in front of our face, tangible things, front-facing storylines. But, of course, 2026 recruiting has been going on up on the Hill with several visits over the course of the past month and a half. Just give us a big picture, 30,000-foot viewpoint of how this 2026 class is shaping up right now, Josh?
Yeah, this 2026 class is a little slow going. That's not to say that it hasn't been productive or that there hasn't been inroads made. I think there's just a little combination of Utah hasn't been great the last 2 years, as well as kind of trying to navigate the market of what, the house settlement brings, different things that way. You have BYU up the road that's really trying hard to kind of be the disruptor as well, as they should be. They also have the most recent track record of winning. And so there's going to be some similar recruits that these two teams are going after that BYU is going to have the upper hand on simply because of that kind of stuff. So there's some good battles there. But for the most part, I mean, recruiting anymore, you're doing this not necessarily for that specific recruiting class. You're doing this for the future as well, right? Some of these kids, and we saw this in the most recent transfer portal period for Utah, they had connections with these guys prior. They, were interested in Utah but decided to go somewhere else. And then they were able to bring them through the transfer portal maybe a few years later or whatever that may be. So there's a lot of that going on. Utah is doing well. They're bringing in a lot of highly ranked recruits in terms of their own state rankings. They recently got an official visit committed for a 5-star offensive tackle coming this weekend, which is huge. If that's the first ever 5-star commit for Utah, that would be great. So there's a lot moving on. It's just been a little bit more of a quiet period than maybe the last few years have been, where Utah had a little bit more momentum behind their back, and being able to move that way.
Wanted to have your Twitter pulled up, and if you're a Ute fan and you're not following Josh, you're missing out. It's J for KSL. If you're still on that platform, he's also on Blue Sky if you prefer that. So it looked like you did something fun, previewing BYU Colorado. And look, man, it is June, so let's talk about it, right? Like, it's summer content, it's summer radio. So tell me what made you decide to do this and unpack some of the content that you were able to unpack with this matchup coming up.
Yeah, so as part of this is I have a little series that I do, for part of my podcast as well as just for the articles on KSL.com, where I take 2 games each week of the schedule to kind of fill some of the summer spots and kind of preview them to kind of get a little bit more of a higher look into different things. And so this week was BYU and Colorado. And these two teams, both obviously had a lot of success last year. They're kind of in some respects, kind of a similar program right now, in the sense that there's a lot of uncertainty in the quarterback position. You don't know what's going to be there. Obviously, if BYU keeps Jake Retzlaff, that changes, right? And I think BYU has a much better advantage going into the season with him under center. But I think there's just so much unknown about these two programs right now about how things are going to come together that it's tough. Now, with that said, BYU is clearly the better team, if not for just the defense alone. They do lose a bunch of key players, especially on the defensive side, the defensive line, but they've added through the portal. They don't do a ton in the portal, but at the same time, the pieces that they do add do fit needs. And so I think with Jay Hill, as the defensive coordinator, there's a lot of optimism that this team, regardless of what happens on the offensive side of the ball, will be great. With Colorado, you're kind of getting a similar approach where the defense is improving. They've got, 2 QBs that they feel strong about. It's just a matter of, one is a freshman, one is a guy that has experience, but can he come up at the P5 level, P4 level? He's had some inaccuracies and deep throws. You also mix that with kind of the notorious nature of Colorado's offensive line and how porous it's been. What can that be? These are 2 teams that provide an interesting challenge for Utah that late in the season, where it gets into the second half of the season. You can call it the rivalry stretch, whatever you want to call it, the one real rivalry and the one that was kind of forced upon Utah and Colorado. But 2 interesting games regardless, and I think this is kind of the pivot point for Utah, that if they're going to be good, these 2 games are going to kind of have the standing there to kind of prove what Utah can be.
So I was just kind of cruising around a little bit, looking at some of the early Big 12 stuff, and I believe I saw Utah among the bottom of the conference in returning production. I think the number I saw was 12 starters coming back. Once upon a time, that's a death sentence, right? Once upon a time, you're like, wait, what? Could that be construed as a positive coming off a negative season a year ago?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's double-edged sword type situation, right? Like, obviously, the teams that have the most consistency, especially if they were good coming back, that helps. But I think in this era where you can quickly kind of retool your roster if things aren't working is a great asset, right? And Utah 100% did that. Defensively, a majority of their starters came back. And so you do have some consistency there. There's still some turnover, but a lot of the guys that are in like the depth there, they were getting some starter reps. And so there's a little less questions there on that side of the ball. But as we've talked, a few times on the offense, this is a completely retooled offense. There's very few leftover or hangover from last season, which is probably a good thing given the nature of what it was. Obviously, it didn't go well because Cam Rising was another center, but I think there was just so much of a downer mentality on that offensive side of the ball that you just kind of needed a reset of it. And so I think bringing in new blood, new players can bring a whole new level of optimism and excitement. The question just comes, can it gel together? And I think you're starting to see the coaches in this industry that can gel a transfer portal class together the best are going to be the ones that succeed. That's why Kenny Dillingham has done well at Arizona State. That's why they've been able to grow so quickly. A team like that, there was no way they were going to be able to be in the playoffs last year based on kind of the old standard of things. So, I don't think it's as bad as it used to be. I think this is definitely a much easier process to be able to retool an offense or defense or whatever it may have you. But I think there's still a lot of questions that go into that Utah may be good, and I think the expectation is that they will, but there's still so many questions that have to be answered before you fully understand that, more so than if you have a team that's coming back that has a lot of that consistency.
All right, Josh, since you and I last spoke, free at last. The House v. NCAA was finally pushed across the line. The settlement is done. It's interesting to read around different takes and different prognostications and predictions about how each P4 member institution will disseminate these funds. Dan Wetzel's piece for ESPN.com believes that, generally speaking, most programs will allocate 75% of the $20.5 million to the football program, about 15% to the men's basketball program, 5% to the women's basketball program, which leaves 5% of the revenue left over. Now, I continue to remind our listeners, this is not NIL. NIL is separate from the money that the institutions now have at their disposal to pay these young people who play sports at institutions. I try to stay away from the term student athlete. It's not real. So your thoughts on those general estimates and how you think it will kind of play out at Utah once the dust settles?
Yeah, I think you're going to see a pretty similar model there. I think it makes the most sense because football does take up the majority of that. A lot of those numbers did come through from analytics and research that was done in these committees that these conference commissioners go to, that these athletic directors go to. And so I think you're going to see a pretty standard approach for a lot of schools. The real question comes with schools like Gonzaga, for example, that don't have football. That changes the tone for them. They can suddenly a lot more to basketball, and suddenly they became even more of a player in that area. So, this isn't going to be equal for every team. That's not the point of it. It's more just kind of a baseline for a lot of these programs to be able to start. And then if you do have this quote unquote true NIL, then that kind of is where that level playing field changes, right? Where you get back to different things that allow private entities to be able to give players money. So, I think by and large, this is good for the product. We've sat here for years pretending that this is an amateur program, when in reality, I mean, these athletes should be getting paid. I understand that causes some problems for people, and I would have to say a majority of that comes from the NIL situations. But the hope is that with NIL and, the House settlement, that there will be sorely some ties to, some consistency and allow there to be some more penalties for programs that don't do it, that should have more teeth than what the NCAA did. But the reality is this is going to be litigated. This is going to have some issues. There's going to be people that find problems with it. Title IX people are going to come in. The reality is, though, if you look at it, football is the bulk of what these schools are bringing in. And so by and large, they should get the majority of it. They're the ones that are bringing it in, and that's the most popular. So I don't necessarily have a problem with it. I think it's probably on par with where it should be. But I'm really fascinated to kind of see where Utah fully lands and how they manage that, how they manage scholarships and different things that way.
bit of a non sequitur, yet it is kind of in this space that we're talking about, and it's yesterday's news, but I haven't asked you about this. Now, there are going to be several programs, several member institutions and athletic departments across the landscape of college sports that have already had to make hard decisions, will continue to have to make hard decisions, and unfortunately the bottom line is the revenue comes from certain places, and we can be clutching our pearls about this or that or whatever, but the bottom line in business is always the bottom line. And Utah Athletics actually did make a tough decision cutting beach volleyball. I haven't asked you about this. To help me understand the criteria here and your understanding of the reaction from the team after they heard the news.
Yeah, this is a tough situation for them. Obviously, anytime the program you're a part of gets cut, there's going to be frustrations, and there's going to be people that are upset. They're not going to be able to see the true vision of what the university wants. And so there's always going to be this back and forth on who is right. Did they care about the team? Did they do that? That's how those athletes felt, is that the athletic department didn't care about them. But there's some truth in the middle there, right? Obviously the athletic department cared about them, but the reason they're letting them go is essentially they don't feel like it fits within the portfolio that they want, right? And I think the more it goes on, I think that's fine. I think universities have to make their own case, and at least according to Utah, they say this doesn't come because of the House settlement and trying to make money easier for the rest of the programs. I think it was more just they just didn't feel like they had the appetite to invest in it more, right? And if they didn't feel like they had that ability, it was not fair to the athletes who did come there, who, in retrospect felt like maybe they didn't have the support that they needed. So it's a double-edged sword again. It's one of those situations where it's tough because you don't want to see any of these athletes who are coming in and getting opportunities to play at a higher level to not have that anymore in the state of Utah. But at the same time, if you take the other side of it, this allows Utah to be able to put more emphasis on other programs that'll help them grow. So it's tough. I feel for those athletes that they were expecting to finish out their careers at Utah and be able to play, maybe position yourself for a professional league in volleyball. But, Utah has to do what they need to do. And unfortunately, that just doesn't fit for the beach volleyball team.
All right, so before I set you loose, let's do a little bit of basketball, a little hoops, as Alex Jensen has officially finalized his roster for his first foray into Big 12 play. Every time that I discuss Utah men's basketball in year one for AJ, I'm going to continue to temper expectations. This is going to take some time. However, I have talked to Utah basketball fans that point down south and say that didn't take a lot of time. It's a little bit of apples and oranges for several different reasons, but I won't go down the entire roster, Josh. We don't have time to do that. But just what are your takeaways and what are your expectations now that we know who the players are year one under Al?
Yeah, I think this is, Utah really emphasizing kind of the Big 12 style of trying to get into the small ball system, trying to get athletic guards that can kind of move up and down the court, really trying to push the tempo to really become the quote-unquote running Utes. I know Craig Smith really wanted to kind of lean into that. He just wasn't able to get the recruits that he wants. But this seems like a team that, if it gels well together, can have a lot of potential. There's a lot of upside there. There's a lot of, dynamic abilities and talents there. That rim is going to be broken a million times because these guys are dunking on it all the time. But it's hard to piece together a roster like that when it's completely going down to the studs, right? Like you bring in essentially back Keanu Dawes, and that was it. So, it's going to take some time. They're in their summer workouts right now, and, soon we'll probably get an opportunity to talk with them and kind of see how things are gelling together. Last year's squad felt like they were really connected, and they just didn't have a lot of shooters. And so if you can get that same level of connection, Alex Jensen can have his way and really coach these guys up. I think you at least have a team that on paper could be on par with what Utah had last year, if not a little bit better, especially on the athleticism side. But it's tough to be able to say that this is going to be an instant contender from day one when you have so many talented teams in the Big 12. But I think you've got a good shot with what Alex Jensen has built in his first year.
All right, last thing, and I'll set you loose. Again, I won't go game by game. I'll just ask you your takeaways from the schedule release. And the Big 12 basketball schedule is a little bit different. It's trimmed just a little bit to make for some non-con space. Takeaways for the conference schedule for Utah men's basketball next year.
Yeah, I think it's nice that they have their 3 home and homes that are close games. So you've got BYU, Arizona State, and Colorado, all teams that Utah's very familiar with, where you get them home and away. So you know you're going to stay close. You know you've got teams that you're familiar with and comfortable with. And then you've got a good balancing act of teams that are coming home with Arizona, Iowa State, TCU, Houston, UCF, and Oklahoma State. I think that gives you a great opportunity to host a lot of cool teams in the Huntsman Center. You know, you still get the difficult tests on the road where you get to travel to Kansas and Kansas State, Texas Tech, Baylor, that kind of stuff. But I think it's a balanced approach that I think benefits Utah. Will it work? Who knows, right? I don't know that any schedule would work with this roster necessarily. But there is an advantage in the sense that it's only 18 games versus 20 in years past. So you have 2 less games of conference play where you can kind of maybe pad that schedule a little bit with some wins. But I think, you know, there's some advantages here to be able to have what you have. But it's going to be a tough task, no matter what it is. You know, yeah, you get Arizona, you know, Houston, Iowa State at home, but those aren't going to be easy games at all. But at least you're going to have some fun. The fans are going to be able to show out. And if Utah's good, you at least have, in theory, a good Huntsman Center that's packed and people excited to be there.
Josh, thanks, man, for the time. Appreciate it. Have a great week, and we will chat soon.
Sounds great. Appreciate it, man.
All right, Josh Furlong stops by today, courtesy of our friends at Advanced Window Products, where you can get $2,500 off when you buy 10 windows or more. Local Salt Lake company, operated by a guy, Nate Orchard, the mayor of Sac Lake City, and played in the NFL for a number of years. So here's the deal. The weather is warm. I don't know if you guys have noticed that. Is your house way too hot? Well, you probably need new windows, and if you're jacking up that air conditioning, you're just hemorrhaging money. So if you call today, you can save $2,500 if you buy 10 windows or more. However, if you feel like you're going to wait until the fall, maybe you're going to buy or sell a home, or maybe you want to wait until the weather actually turns the other way and gets cold. If you call them today at Advanced Window Products, you get on the schedule and you lock in the savings. That's the bottom line. $2,500 off when you buy 10 windows or more. If you pick up the phone and call Advanced Window Products right now at 801-850-9100, that's 801-850-9100, 801-850-9100, or just visit advancedwindows.com. All right, 3 hours in the books, 1 hour to go. Wednesday edition of The Drive with Spence Checketts. Keep it right here on ESPN 700, 92.1 FM. We are proud to be part of Utah's ESPN radio network. All right, what's going on? Drive at 5 time, Wednesday afternoon style, about 7 minutes past the hour of 5 o'clock. It is a scorching hot Utah summer day outside, and as it is, every single day, it's good to have you along for the ride. Spence Checketts behind the mic, Porter Larson behind the glass. We'll get to some NBA Finals conversation. We'll get to some Jazz off-season conversation and some NBA draft conversation, which is 1 week away from today. Reminder, we'll have coverage, live coverage, of both the first and the second round of the NBA draft coming up next week. I'll be anchoring our coverage. We're going to bring in Gordy Chase and Richard Smith. So stay tuned for that. Coming up next week, Tony Jones from The Athletic will stop by. A lot of trade rumors regarding the Utah Jazz floating around right now. But before we get to all that, before we get to TJ, I am honored to welcome in, even though he went to Woods Cross, my buddy Gavin from Honest Second Opinion Plumbing. Gavin, how are you, man?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Spence?
I'm good, so I appreciate the time. So folks out there may be tired of their plumbing problems, turning into a sales pitch. Why are you guys different at Honest Second Opinion Plumbing?
No, that's a great question. So about 8 years ago, I had a HVAC system that was failing on me in the wintertime. The furnace kept turning off, wouldn't turn on. And so I was trying to figure out what was going on with it. I called a well-known HVAC company in Utah. They came out, and after about 3.5 hours, they sold me, or they tried to sell me, on a brand-new furnace system. So about $3,000, and I was like, guys, you've been here for 3.5 hours. I want you out of my home. I ended up calling a local handyman. He came by, and he looked at the furnace. He cleaned the flame rod sensor, spent about 10 minutes on it, charged me $50 and left, and it continued to work for the next 8 years. And so we don't fix the problems ourselves, but we do go provide a diagnostic service for your plumbing concerns, and then give you possible solutions and a price range. So that's what kind of sets us apart. It's a unique situation, I guess.
So essentially you saw a hole in the market, right?
Exactly.
And I think all of us can relate to, hey, I need to get my oil change. And you take it somewhere that's some random spot, and they're like, oh, by the way, you need a new brake, whatever it is. And suddenly it's $2,500 when you just needed your oil change. This is kind of similar, yeah?
Exactly. And especially if you don't, if you're not a car guy, it's like, well,
right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I just got to take your word for it.
Exactly.
I need new brake pads.
Very interesting. So tell me about some of the feedback, customer, testimonials and such that you guys have at Honest Second Opinion Plumbing.
No, absolutely. So last week we had a lady. She was in her 80s. It was actually her grandson that reached out to us to have her go by. And we went by. She said that her sink was leaking, and she was quoted. We saw the quote. It was about $3,500 is what they quoted her. I filled up the sink, and I was not seeing any water damage underneath the sink. I checked the garbage disposal, wasn't seeing any problems with that. And I was like, I cannot get this sink to leak. And so I was looking at it, and then I saw a drying rack. She didn't have a dishwasher. She had a drying rack on the counter next to her. And I was like, hey, do me a favor. Show me what it looks like when you wash dishes. And so she grabbed her, her cookie sheet, and she was washing it, and water was just pouring off the edge of her counter.
Yeah.
And so it was just flooding her kitchen every time she was doing dishes. And so it's like you don't need a new sink. You just need to be a little bit more careful when you're washing your dishes. And so, saved her $3,500. There's, been multiple experiences where there's some predatory practices that are going out with other plumbing companies, other people that are, they're incentivized to charge more because they get paid more.
Sure.
If you spend more.
So what's the process like? If we have a listener right now that's like, yeah, I've got a plumbing issue, and I had somebody come to the house and they quoted me $3,000. What's the process that they'll go through with Honest Second Opinion Plumbing?
No, that's a fantastic question. So the first thing we do is we hop on a video call. We just try and save the environment. Keep one more car off the road.
Sure, yeah.
And if we can see the issue, then we'll tell you, hey, look, it looks like you've got a leaky faucet. It looks like this is the issue. If we can't see it, we'll send one of our professionals out there to go and inspect it. Now we're not going to tear into your walls or anything like that. So if we can't see the issue, we'll give you our best guess. And like we've said, we give you the same advice we'd give our own mothers. And so we look at it. If we need to, we'll go out. It takes usually less than 20 minutes. If we're on site, if it's a phone call, it's 5 to 10 minutes usually. And then we put you in contact with one of our trusted referral partners to keep you from having to go out there and search the internet to find somebody that can take care of you. And this way you're empowered with some knowledge to know, hey, here's what professional thinks the issue is. So I don't need you selling me on something else. Let's focus on what somebody else that isn't incentivized to sell me thinks the issue is, and they've given me a price range. and then we'll put you in contact with some professionals that will come by and fix it for you.
Sounds awesome. How can they get a hold of you at Honest Second Opinion Plumbing?
Yep, so they can go to Honest Second Opinion, and that's second, the number 2nd opinion.com. So honest, number 2nd opinion.com. Or they can give us a call at 801-341-9592.
Just let me clean something up real quick. Is it Honest Second Opinion or HonestSecondOpinionPlumbing.com?
It is just Honest Second Opinion.
Very nice. Need to update my copy. So go to HonestSecondOpinion.com right now. HonestSecondOpinion.com or dial 801-341-9592. 801-341-9592. 801-341-9592. Gavin, great to meet you. Thanks, man.
Yeah, thank you, Spence.
All right, we will catch a quick break, and coming up on the other side, we're going to preview Game 6 of the NBA Finals. Breaking news that the Los Angeles Lakers have been sold for a cool $10 billion. 1 week away from the NBA draft. Who are the Jazz looking at? Trade wins on the horizon. Is any of that real? Tony Jones will enlighten and illuminate us coming up on the other side on a Wednesday edition of The Drive right here on ESPN 700. All right, man. All right, wrapping up the program Wednesday. Tomorrow's Thursday. Jumped ahead. Halfway through your work week, one day close to the weekend, Wednesday edition of The Drive. A little bit of NFL news, which actually seems like it means something. Jair Alexander is signing with the Baltimore Ravens, leaving the Green Bay Packers. 1-year deal worth about $6 million. Reunited with Lamar Jackson. Very, very good player. So little NFL news. It is a very, very quiet time in the world of the NFL and also in the world of college football. The CFP meetings wrapped up, and the headline is, the CFP meetings wrapped up with everything on the table. Way to go, guys. Way to figure something out. According to Heather Dinich from ESPN, the leaders of the college football playoff are, quote, still mulling over what the format should look like in 2026 and beyond. Rich Clark is the CFP executive director. These people that are in charge of the sport, quote, pretty much everything's on the table, and they're taking a good look at all of it. So I wouldn't say there's a leading contender right now, but they're taking a fresh look at it. Sweet. So a bunch of meetings took place over the past week, and nothing was figured out. All right, NBA Finals resume tomorrow. The Oklahoma City Thunder will look to eliminate the Indiana Pacers at Gainbridge Fieldhouse in Indianapolis. You can hear the game on our radio station. We are your home of the NBA Finals. We also are your home of the Stanley Cup Finals, which concluded last night. The Florida Panthers are back-to-back winners of Lord Stanley's Cup, and they are among the Vegas favorites to win it again next year. The Los Angeles Lakers, who were purchased by Dr. Jerry Buss once upon a time for $67.5 million, sold today for a cool $10 billion. Buss family is entering an agreement to sell the majority ownership of the Lakers to Mark Walter, who also owns the Dodgers. Mark tried to buy the Clippers, but lost the bidding war to Steve Ballmer for $2 billion. So a few years later, extra $8 billion, you get your team in Los Angeles. So there you go. All right, Porter, you've been on the Pacers can do this train. Are you still on the Pacers can do this train? I mean, obviously a lot is contingent upon the health of one Tyrese Halliburton.
Right. Hard to give the Pacers a real shot at winning this with, a 3-2 cushion. You really got to go south if you are Oklahoma City, especially if Tyrese Halliburton is not the player that we've seen throughout really since New Year's or so. Tyrese Halliburton and the Pacers have really been one of the best teams in the league. That being said, we talked about it before. Once you make it best of three, Spence, Pascal Siakam going for 40, I don't know. It could happen. I've seen him make really big plays in really big moments, including a finals in which, yes, Kawhi Leonard was the finals MVP, and rightfully so. That Pascal Siakam guy's got a thing to say, I'm sure, before this thing is over, but a real uphill battle, and it has been since they lost that Game 4. I really think, once you took that 2-1 lead, if you were Indiana, you had to capitalize on that, and they weren't able to, and now I think it is very much the Thunder series to lose.
I could see Indiana getting it tomorrow. The line is 6.5. If you're into such things, I would take the points. I would take Indiana and the points. I'd probably take OKC to win. That building is underrated. A lot has been made of OKC's home court advantage, and it is incredibly great. In the 146 minutes of basketball action in Oklahoma City, OKC has led for 143 minutes of those. The home court advantage for Indiana is also tilted in their favor, but not near like it is in OKC. Let me ask you this. I was kind of surprised to hear TJ believe that if Tyrese does not go, TJ McConnell does not start. Now, there were a lot of Pacer fans that were mad that Rick Carlisle actually went away from McConnell in Game 5 after the chaos he caused when he was actually playing in the game. Now, this is kind of like the old, the backup quarterback's the most popular player in the stadium, because if your starting quarterback continues to not play well, you're like, well, let's give the other kid a chance. I always caution fans to pump the brakes a bit on believing one of your second unit guys should be a starter and play big minutes. The reason's obvious. Backups play against backups, not exclusively. I'm not taking anything away from McConnell, who was great, 18 points. He had 4 assists, 4 rebounds, and 2 steals. So if Halliburton doesn't play, do you think Carlisle starts McConnell? Do you think he starts Matherin? and just slides Neesmith over to the starting point guard role? If Halliburton doesn't play, who starts for the Pacers?
Yeah, I think McConnell probably starts. You trust him a little bit more. But man, if you're Rick Carlisle, you're really going to need not just a good effort, but good shooting, low turnovers, all of the above from the guys you just mentioned, Mathurin, Naismith, Nembhard, right? Those are all players who are going to have to step up, not only on defense and on making things tough on the MVP and SGA, but they're going to have to create a little bit, and not just for themselves. They're going to have to create a little bit to give space to Siakam, give Miles Turner some operating room on the block. If they don't do that and they don't have Tyrese Halliburton, then they're going to struggle to get 90 points on the board.
Yeah, and, as I continue to dig into this Pacer roster, because we continue to try to motivate Jazz fans to look at teams that once upon a time were in purgatory like the Jazz are and understand how they've been able to make their way out of it. And the more I dig into certain teams, the more I realize what an exercise in futility it is oftentimes, namely because the teams that have been able to find their way out of a clunky rebuild have found a cornerstone. And until the Jazz do that, that is priority number one. That is why, in my opinion, if R.C. Buford calls Austin Ainge and says Markkanen in 5 for Harrison Barnes, Keldon Johnson in 2, I think you do it because Markkanen is really good. I just don't think he's a cornerstone. I think Dylan Harper might be. I always look at Detroit. They have Cade. I look at Orlando. They have Paolo. I could keep going. And, Oklahoma City has the MVP. And this ultimately depends on how you calculate Tyrese Halliburton. The whole narrative around him has been somewhat exhausting. Like, the definition of a superstar is not exact. It can be debated. It is something that varies depending on who you're talking about. But we did see Halliburton play an entire NBA Finals game without scoring. Indiana, you could make an argument that they just don't have a Jokic, a Giannis, an SGA. Their highest draft pick is Benedict Mathurin, who's 6th. Miles Turner was 11. Nembhard was a second-round pick. And then they found some scrap pieces like Neesmith, who couldn't get off the bench in Boston. Porter's point about Siakam, he was the second-best player on the Raptors team that won a championship. They maxed him out when a lot of teams wouldn't have, and he's been perfect for them. It does feel like this Pacer roster is probably the closest thing I've landed on to giving Jazz fans some hope about what it can look like if you go about it the right way. Now, going about it the right way certainly has not been the MO down to that building for a while. They've whiffed on picks. I don't know that they got enough for Mitchell. I know the narrative at the time was, they got a haul for Donovan. Really? These other teams that have traded away stars, namely these two in the finals, were able to find a cornerstone, a franchise piece. Have the picks conveyed? No, they haven't. Have you paid attention to Cleveland and Minnesota? They're really good, and they're going to be good for a while. So I said it at the time. Like, all these people, they got a haul for Gobert. They got a haul for Mitchell. Well, did they? Walker Kessler's a nice piece. Larry Markkanen's a nice piece. But if you're trading away stars in their prime, you better get something back in return that indicates you received at least another potential cornerstone, like an SGA, like a Tyrese. So, game day for us on the station tomorrow. NBA Finals back. Kind of a quiet sports night. I mean, if you're into baseball, there's a lot of baseball going on. But that's about it. So we'll get out of here. We'll say goodnight for a Wednesday show. Porter, what comes our way on a Thursday edition of the program?
On a Thursday edition of The Drive, we will chat with our friend Chris Comer. Ronnie, of course, you're out on a Friday, so I invited Chris in on a Thursday. Dave McMiniman, well, the day after the sale of the Los Angeles Lakers, might be a pretty good guy to discuss it with. We were going to chat with Andy Larson tomorrow, but he was nice enough to audible to today with the breaking news that the LA Lakers were sold. We'll do some sports court and replace Andy with, I don't know, maybe some more Jazz, soccer. I don't know. Maybe that's your call, Spence, which direction we go there.
How about a little Ben Solak?
Ooh, we can hit him up.
Reach
a little
out to
NFL
Ben.
offseason.
Let's do some NFL offseason on the program. But whatever comes our way, it'll be a good time. So join us for a Thursday drive, and we'll say goodnight. And a special thank you to Tony Jones, Neil Smith, Andy Larson, and Josh Furlong. For any of the sound you may miss from the show, a few options. Website, ESPN700sports.com. Download our mobile app and take us on the go. That ESPN 700 app is available in the App Store and the Google Play Store. Then finally, for what we do in our space every afternoon for 4 hours, check out our podcast page. It's called The Drive with Spence Checketts. It's available wherever you get your shows. Subscribe, rate, review, whatever your catcher or podcast platform asks you to do. Do it for us. Say nice things in the comments and give us all the stars. You will be eternally blessed. He's Porter. I'm Spence. Saying goodnight. Enjoy your Wednesday evening. We'll talk to you on a Thursday edition, game day edition of The Drive. And you can catch it, as always, right here on ESPN 700, 92.1 FM. We are proud to be part of Utah's ESPN Radio Network.